Open the meeting and welcome everyone to the GCP Joint Assembly meeting. The first item on the agenda is the election of chairperson. Can I call for nominees for the position of chair? Yes.
I'd like to nominate Councillor Weatherspoon.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder for that? Are there any further nominations? In that case, can I ask those in favour of Councillor Weatherspoon being elected chairman for the coming year, please to indicate. Thank you. Any against? Any abstentions? Can I therefore declare Councillor Weatherspoon duly elected chair?
Right then. Well, thank you very much. That's very kind of you to have re-elected me to be your chairman. I hope I did a reasonable job last time, and I'll try to continue if that's how I did it last time. And it really is an honour, and I really enjoy doing this job. So thank you very much again. So the next item on the agenda is for the appointment of the vice chairman. So could I have nominations for appointment of vice chairman? Eileen, yes, Councillor Wilson.
I'd like to nominate Councillor Bick.
And do we have a seconder for that nomination? Yes, Councillor Sullivan. Thank you very much. Are there any other nominations? I should have a vote then. So all those in favour of appointing Councillor Bick to be the vice chair. Thank you very much. Any against? Any abstentions? No? Very good. In that case, I'll declare Councillor Bick appointed vice chairman or vice chairperson. Is that what we're supposed to call him on this body? Just as he's taking his seat, I'll say how much I have appreciated his support in the past 12 months, and I look forward to working with him again as we go ahead. That brings us to item 3, so we'll start with apologies for absence, because I gather we have a few.
Yes, good afternoon. We have apologies from Councillors Massey, Councillor Kavanagh and Councillor Topping.
Thank you, and I gather that Councillor Bates, who is the transport portfolio holder for the Executive Board, is also not able to be with us today. He usually attends these meetings, but he's sunning himself in warmer climes. But it's my great pleasure to welcome Councillor Mike Davey to our ranks. He had his induction yesterday, I gather, and so he knows all about the way we work, and he's looking forward, I gather, to playing a full and active role in our proceedings, so that's wonderful. And I shouldn't let the moment pass without saying thanks again to Dave Bagent for his 2 stints on the Assembly, a very characteristic voice. I'm sure we'll miss him, and we wish him well. Item 4 then, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? Yes, thank you, Mr. Wilkinshaw.
Chairman, I should declare, in addition to my normal declaration about my place of work being on the east side of the city and therefore having an interest, that my employer is Marshall of Cambridge, and we've recently made some announcements about possible development in the next planning window.
Yes, very exciting announcements they were too. Any other declarations of interest? Just a reminder, members, that should anything arise during the meeting that leads you to believe that you have a declaration of interest, then feel free to make it at the top. Right, yes, Councillor David.
I feel as though I see from the minutes that those who are on the CAM cycling campaign should declare interest, so I feel I should declare that interest.
Well done, yes, join the ranks. Yes, well done. Good. So that takes us to the minutes of the previous meeting. So we'll go through these page by page. Page 2, 3, 4.
Yes, Chair, if I may.
Very good, thank you.
Just the last paragraph under the quarterly progress report on page 4, I promised to bring back an update on the question that Councillor Bickard raised around how we work with the planning authorities on section 106. We are doing that work and we are having some really useful and fruitful discussions, but we were not ready to conclude that, and therefore there is not an update on this time's progress report, but we hope to do that at the next quarter.
Yes, Councillor Williams.
Yeah, Chair, also on page 4 at the top, we talk about cross-cycling campaign, and it says Fulbourn roads caused by land acquisition, but these are now complete and work could proceed. Actually, work hasn't proceeded. There's been nothing happening since the last meeting, and I'd very much appreciate an update as to why nothing is happening on Fulbourn Road. Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much for alerting us to that. We'll see whether we can get an answer to you today, but we'll definitely get an answer for you at some stage. Page 5, page 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11. No further challenges to the minutes. In that case, when they're tickled, I will sign them as a correct record. They're broadly speaking correct, is that right? Or you want to make a slight alteration? Yeah, we'll deal with that shortly. Okay, just on the last meeting, after watching the video, someone came up to me and said, what on earth are you talking about how will it play in Peoria? And it made me realise that I'm probably actually of a very elderly generation now, because obviously a lot of these phrases are they're just lost on those who form a greater proportion of our population these days. And it reminds me that we got into an awful lot of trouble when one of our members referred to buttering the parsnips as a metaphor of ensuring that we should not be just attending to the urban aspects of Greater Cambridge, but also to the rural villages. And of course, I was referring to Councillor Wilson's regular raising of what's become known as the Cottenham question, which is that obviously we put a lot of effort into the main transport radial routes, but how are we connecting the villages offline? And so when I referred to how will it play in Peoria, it was a reference to mainstream America, and it was a metaphorical reference to the fact that as the Greater Cambridge Partnership, we are just as much concerned with increasing connectivity in the rural elements of South Cambridgeshire as in Cambridge City. So I just thought I should make that clear. Right, so that takes us to questions from the public. We've had 5 questions submitted. I accepted all of those on the protocol of public questions because they all related to items on the agenda. The details have been published and are available for members and the public to see. Since that publication, the question from Mal Schofield relating to item 8 has been withdrawn, and John Boston, who is not able to be here today, he is accepting a written response to his question. So that just leaves us with 3 questions, one relating to item 8, one to item 9 and one relating to item 10. So we'll call those as we reach each of those items. Item 7 is petitions. We don't have any petitions, so that takes us straight on to item 8. And at this point, I will start with the public question. Then we'll have the officer's response to the question, and he will then proceed to present the report, possibly with yes, he and Isabel will present the report, and then we'll have our debate. Yes. Sorry, I didn't allow time for you to come up to the table earlier, but here we are. Okay. So can I start by inviting the questioner to come up to speak on item 8? David Stoughton? Stoughton, I'm so sorry, right then. So have you done this before? You know the drill? Or you press the button and then you have 3 minutes, and because we only have 3 questions today, we're not subjecting you to the traffic lights, but I'm assured that the clock will be ticking, and should a prompt be given to the Vice Chairman, Chairperson, he will perhaps prompt me, but 3 minutes if you can, please, thank you.
I don't believe you'll have to handcuff me to take me off. My question concerns what I think is a feasibility study at the moment about congestion, a possible congestion zone or an air quality control zone. And I wanted to look at the extent of that. We're based up, I'm actually representing Great Northern Road Residents Association, and we're the Residents Association on the CB1 area near the station. The station has very, very fast growth in traffic, and that's expected to grow very substantially over the next few years, especially with the further developments that are going on, that are planned till 2030, having been to the planning meeting. It's not clear from the feasibility study quite what the extent will be. I understand the ring road is being considered, but it also says roads that lead into that. I'd like to suggest that not including the station not only doesn't deal with the problem in the station area, which is being exacerbated as we go along, but also means that people avoiding any area will increasingly use the rat runs that lead up into the station, especially Tennyson Road and the feeder roads that lead into it. So my question is this being taken into consideration in deciding the extent of the area? Thank you, I think that's all.
Thank you very much. We'll now hear from the officer.
Thank you, Chair. So actually, you've clearly articulated...
Could you press your button again, please?
You've clearly articulated some of the considerations we need to have when we progress this work. What the latest round of engagement that we've just gone through, the choices for better journeys, actually introduced air quality and also the carbon agenda. The paper that's before the Assembly today, and then we'll go to the Executive Board in a couple of weeks, actually reflects on the feedback of that and starts to draw together some principles of how we might make decisions going forward. It doesn't actually come up with a geography or indeed a scheme development type at the moment. So what it will do is we'll say these are the important considerations, and hitherto the city deal has focused on economic development and congestion, and I think what Assembly members and the board have clearly said previously, and what the work in the recent engagement draws out, is that air quality and carbon are also equally important in terms of this agenda, and so we need to ensure that that's considered as we take this forward over the coming months. So in a sense, watch this space, likely to be later in the year before we get to that level of detail. Well, this is all subject to sort of democratic decisions. At the moment, we're working on a date of December for the next stage of the next iteration of this story.
Thank you very much. And so now you're going to introduce the report. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I just want to say a few opening comments and then hand over to Isabel to do all the hard work and just bring what is a fairly sort of extensive report to life and add a little bit of colour. I mean, really just building on the question that we've had. Conversations you've had hitherto have clearly said that we need to move this from just a congestion base to a wider air quality and carbon agenda. And I think what we've tried to do is reflect the outcome of the engagement which Isabel will talk through, but also plot a way forward based on the sort of paragraph 5 and the table 1 in your paper around what some key principles may look like as to how we assess the next steps. And I think that would be jolly helpful, Chair, to focus on that as part of the discussion, and at which point I'll shut up and hand over to Isabel.
Press your button, Steve.
Cool, thank you. So earlier this year we ran the Choices for Better Journeys engagement campaign, which was looking at how we can create better options for people travelling into and around Cambridge, particularly at peak times. And it set out and sought feedback on the GCP's vision for public transport, the challenges for delivering this and asked for views on different demand management options. It was a wide-ranging campaign. We had more than 5,000 people complete the survey from places kind of all across the travel for work area who travel regularly into Cambridge using a whole variety of different methods of transport. There's the full report in the papers, but just a few things that I wanted to pull out. So in terms of this new public transport network, the most important elements people identified were a reliable and frequent journey. They actually thought all of the things we suggested were important, but those came out as particularly important. 82% of people supported the public transport vision. There's a little bit of variation in this according to kind of where people were based. So Cambridge residents had slightly more support for it, and also people who already use public transport and cycling as well had more support, but overall 82%. For the 5 demand management options that we asked people about, we asked them to rank them in terms of which one the GCP should consider kind of first, second, third, fourth, fifth, and people could also rank another option and make a suggestion as well. So 81% of people ranked one of those 5 suggestions first. So the 5 suggestions I'll kind of run through now. So a pollution charge was ranked first or second by the most participants in the survey, so 44% of people ranked that first or second. The flexible charge to drive at the busiest times, 36% of people ranked that first or second. Physical access restrictions, 32% of people put that first or second. A workplace parking levy, 29% of people put that first or second. And increasing parking charges, 20% of people put that first or second. Of the 19% of people who chose to suggest an other option, the most frequent suggestion was around improving public transport, but without additional funding. So we also gave people the opportunity to comment on different options, and some of the key themes coming through from that were that it was important to make changes to the public transport network and improve that first before kind of demand management was introduced. That additional money raised should be spent on improving transport across the area, and also that it should be cheaper to travel into Cambridge by public transport than to drive. So what the paper does is take these findings together with the technical work that we've done to date, which sets out the kind of scale of the challenge and the potential role that improving public transport and demand management could play in addressing that. It takes those two things together and then, as Peter says, suggests some principles for taking forward the work. And the way that kind of it's structured is 4 overarching principles and then 14 implementation principles. So I think one of the things that would be useful to kind of hear from the Joint Assembly is kind of how does that work, and kind of how does any kind of thoughts on that structuring, as well as on the kind of principles themselves. As Peter referred to, kind of one of the key ones is about saying kind of formally here that the proposal should be tackling congestion and air quality, so both issues, and over the short and the long term. Also kind of a reference to opening up opportunities for public realm as improvements as well. It puts kind of behaviour change at the heart of it, so in particular kind of mode shift to bus, bike and walking, and some points around kind of what that public transport should look like in terms of the level of coverage being comprehensive and providing more direct routes from some of our key residential areas to key employment areas, both those that are kind of in existence now and those in the future. Also talks about improving access and improving people's journeys overall, and the role that that has in supporting the economy, but also in terms of kind of enhancing the environment and getting more people travelling in a different way. And then the final one is around being fair and equitable to people, different people living and working in the city. So those principles would be used to guide any future work, and they also could form part of the scope for the Citizens' Assembly that will meet to discuss these issues later on in the autumn. So that's kind of what I wanted to say in terms of setting the scene. But
thank you. Right, I'll start with Councillor Bick.
Thanks very much, Chair. I wanted to welcome the report, and I'd like to congratulate the officers on what I think has been a very big and very thorough and probably very energy-sapping exercise to take us to this point. And I think the results that we've got from this conversation start to put into context the fears that, in particular, fiscal tools for demand management were some sort of universal target of hostility, because I think that what we can see from the results of what this exercise has done is that when given the context and when shown the potential of the future of the potential measures and when they're explained, what they could achieve, especially in relation to better public transport, the public is open, and maybe some say remarkably open, but I think just to say open, I think, is enough at this point. Referendums have got a bad name, I think, and I would hope that we don't end up treating this like a referendum, or at least the wrong sort of referendum. I would suggest that it's up to officers with our guidance to draw on these results and be guided by them, but not to treat them as handcuffs, because I really don't think that this exercise we've just done is sufficiently binary or sufficiently digital, really, to enable that. But I think it's an extraordinarily positive resource for us to move forward with. And I hope that we really are going to be guided most of all by solutions that are effective to both congestion and pollution, and drawing on utilising measures that we now know that the public is to some degree open to consider. I had a specific comment which struck me from reading this, that it seems that we have a sort of conundrum, or maybe it's just a dilemma, about changing, on the one hand, the number of vehicles, and on the other hand, the quality of the vehicles, by which I mean quality being the degree to which they create pollution. One aspect of this became very clear to me, and there are many that are opaque to me still, but is that where we're talking about vehicles that we're actively trying to encourage people to use, like buses and public transport vehicles, or we're talking about vehicles that we aren't in possession of a complete alternative to, and I'm including in that to some degree many commercial vehicles, the priority really has to be about the quality of the vehicles, the degree to which they pollute, and not purely the number of them. I think that it's really difficult to imagine that we want to encourage people to use buses more and at the same time believe we want to reduce the number of them. It's just obviously totally ridiculous. So it has to be about the degree to which they pollute. And I think in particular, it's very relevant because if you think about it, these are the kind of vehicles that are generally in fleets, and we have to watch out that we don't get vehicles that other parts of the country are already starting to deter if we are not actively doing that ourselves. And to me, this area of the public transport and to some degree the commercial vehicles, it is a distinct area from the larger issue. And I think that when it does come to private motorists, it's, to me, probably more a question of the numbers, and that the numbers carry down the pollution as well, which is already being impacted by national measures and industry measures to reduce pollution from vehicles. But I think the other problem, if we simply close our minds to anything except pollution deterrence, we're going to find that in congestion terms, we might deter some private traffic off the roads, but we're just going to open the roads up to that degree for other traffic to fill it up again, and then we're going to run back to the same congestion that we started out with. But, I mean, these are obviously issues that the officers need. This is kind of the meat of what needs to be done next. But the invitation was to make some observations which help that process, and those are mine. But mainly, it's just a really positive step forward that we've arrived at here, and thank you very much.
Right then, thank you very much. I've got Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chair. Well, can I also add my thanks to the officers for this report, and obviously for the work undertaken by consultants on the consultation. Take up the point that Councillor Bickers made. Of course, we want to reduce congestion to make it to improve public transport reliability, and to also make cycling and walking more attractive in the city centre and in other centres. The difficulty is that at the moment the public transport alternative is the bus, and if you look at page 15 in this report, you'll see that buses make up something like 49% of the NOx emissions in the central area. And so the transport that we want to move people onto is actually very bad for air pollution. So we need to, in addition to tackling congestion, to make their reliability better and make them more attractive to use, we have to do something about the vehicles themselves. And it's clear that in Cambridge, we are being put at a disadvantage in that we don't have a clean air zone, and that Stagecoach, the main bus operator, is taking advantage of that, as we see buses being cascaded down for elsewhere in the country to Cambridge because we don't have a Euro 6 restriction on the use of vehicles. I'm very concerned that Stagecoach is still using Euro 3 buses on our streets, and in fact the new managing director, when I met her, admitted that they still are operating Euro 3 buses in contravention of the quality bus agreement that the county council had agreed with them many years ago. And I do fear that that needs to be tackled in this document, and we really need, if we're going to be serious, introduce a clean air zone as quickly as possible to ensure that we do put some pressure on the major bus operator, that if we are going to give them support, financial support, to increase the frequency and the network of their services, that they have to be done with the best quality vehicles that are currently available. Because as I say, at the moment, we are being disadvantaged, and we are seeing buses that are 15 years old appearing on our roads because they're being pushed out of other cities that are introducing clean air zones. So please take that on board, because otherwise, you know, we will be solving one problem and creating another with air pollution.
Thank you very much. Councillor Solomon.
Thank you, Chair. So following on from both Councillor Bigg and Councillor Williams, I also welcome this report. You may be unsurprised to hear. I mean, just to pick up particularly on Councillor Williams' point, that push towards better vehicle standards in particularly the public transport side of things, it's not reflected in the principles anywhere particularly. There's an overarching principle that talks about reduction in carbon emissions, but it seems less specific on a push to better quality public transport in terms of emissions. On those, it seems like these principles are the main thing that you're interested in getting our feedback on. And a couple of specific points, I guess, on them. On considering how to ensure it's cheaper to take public transport, just a small point, but really highlighting the challenge for families taking public transport and how much that can cost. And so considering that as a vital part of that principle, I would like to see brought out. Possibly a little bit more significantly is this principle that we've seen reflected in the feedback from the survey, L, bring forward public transport improvements before any demand management scheme becomes operational. People want that, but is it possible to deliver? Paragraph 3.25, the last sentence in there. To deliver those improvements, we will need to make more space for public transport in the city centre by reducing the number of cars on the road. So I guess it's fine in principle, but I'm still not seeing any principles of how we achieve that, or is there a staircase of measures that we take to get there? I'd just like to hear from the officers exactly what's envisaged by that principle, because it still feels too woolly. And finally, just on the Citizens' Assembly, which I've previously advocated for, and I'm pleased to see that we've got some support to deliver that. Just a question on procedure. It seems like the Citizens' Assembly will be set up in the scope will be defined after the board meeting, and then will immediately proceed with the Citizens' Assembly. Is there any opportunity for the Assembly or the board to scrutinise that scope before it goes to actually being set up? Because otherwise the officers are in control of what the question is without our scrutiny. So just a comment on that.
Right then. Yeah, okay. I think those are worth answering right away, if that's okay with the other members, if I can keep you waiting as well. Yeah. They're perhaps not ready to answer them straight away.
We're just working out the answer. Okay, so not often I get called woolly. Principle 1A says congestion and air quality, and I recognise unpacking that is tricky. But at the moment, we don't have air quality as a principle. You've all said it to me, most of you individually when we had these conversations. So it would be completely counterintuitive to say, as I've said to you before, we broadly need to double the public transport offer. We have air quality as a principle, and all we're going to do is put rubbish vehicles in the city environment. And quite rightly, you would challenge me on the delivery plan to do that. So I recognise we don't ride vehicle standards as a principle, but I think when we come forward with a package of measures, that would be a reasonable challenge, and certainly one I would be expecting to defend if I've not been able to answer the question. And sorry, just in terms of the wider point, everywhere is losing out to London at the moment on the quality of vehicles. This is not just a Cambridge thing. If you go around the country, all of the areas that are looking at clean air zones, they are increasingly concerned that the type of vehicles from the public transport side are getting pulled out of London, because London is spending hundreds of millions of pounds upgrading the vehicle fleet. And sorry, just one final pitch. And alongside that, it's not just buses. The report also says diesel cars are a significant contributor to the problem. Delivery plan, absolutely right. And it is a staircase. So to achieve the public transport aspiration that we wanted, if we're looking to effectively double the size of the operation, we do need to take traffic levels down. But there are things we can do on day one. So we know, because people tell us, that actually the hours of operation aren't terribly good. Well, actually, at 10 o'clock in an evening or on a weekend, there's less of a traffic problem. So actually, there's less of a problem with putting additional vehicles on. We've had the conversation about the types of vehicles. It would be jolly nice, wouldn't it, to have hybrid electric vehicles. That's deliverable in the shorter term. I know I've still got the sort of the Cotton question hanging around my neck, but in the short term, we are able to do something around transport and access in the villages, because they do not suffer, by and large, from congestion problems at peak time. So we are able to make a series of incremental improvements that enhances the public transport offer, whilst we work towards change. But you're absolutely right to raise it, because the delivery plan will be a key part of this. Both in terms of giving confidence to you as sort of decision makers, but actually also in terms of telling the story to the general public. So that's going to be key to it. In terms of the Citizens' Assembly.
He's passing that one to me. So we're delighted to have received government backing to be one of only 3 pilots to run a citizens' assembly. So I hesitate, therefore, to criticise our colleagues in Whitehall, but basically they were late in making those awards. So originally, when we made the bid, we would have run it as part of the engagement on choices for better journeys. Unfortunately, we didn't have the award of funding in time to do that. So we are needing to build it into the development of our next stage. And we do feel we need to understand where the Assembly and Board are before we finalise that. Then we are quite tight on time in terms of getting to the next point. So that's not meant to be an excuse. It just doesn't fit with the public meeting timeframe, but I'm more than happy to undertake that we will, of course, consult Assembly members on that scope once we've had the Executive Board in June. We are aiming to run it in September, so it would, we just need quite a quick turnaround on getting your input into that.
Right then, sorry, Mr Walkinshaw, please.
Thank you, Chair. So, without repeating everything, welcome the report, excellent report, and really good analysis, which gives us good information to work with. I just want to pick up 2 things, really welcoming points I've made before, is almost like the Cottenham Plus question, this issue around getting round Cambridge as well as around Cambridge, so getting around the outside, really keen to see that follows through. And equally, as a resident of East Cambridgeshire, I understand where the City Deal money goes. There is a specific reference to only Cambridge and South Cambridgeshire village, towns and villages. A lot of the people who work in the area live in our neighbouring areas too. Can we not forget them, please?
Thank you, a good point. Councillor Davey.
Again, like Christopher's just said, at the risk of not wishing to repeat what everybody said, just to answer the question, quite simply to welcome the report and to see the priorities as you've requested and the order that you've requested, I think we would welcome. Particularly pleased that air pollution and congestion are top of the list. I think 2 further things really just to build on what's been said. Likewise to the Citizens' Assembly, we're very keen to see what the breadth is and how long it'll be carrying on for, that it's not just a short piece of work, and it's an ongoing piece of work, that we make sure that people who live in the GCP area have the ability to communicate effectively with us. The bit about the bus, I was also going to raise Councillor Williams' point about the buses. I'm not sure I quite understand why we should be dependent upon what London doesn't want, because surely it should be about us creating the highest standard possible for those people who live in Cambridge, although I do accept there are financial constraints within that. The final point I would make is about the desire, I think, from our side that something is seen about the affordability of transport. I'm not sure within the 4 priorities it's quite as clear as I think we would like to see. I think there's a danger that those who can least afford it will end up paying the most. And I think something needs to be in there about our priorities and how we're therefore able to make transport affordable to all. Thank you, Chair.
It's certainly a point that your colleague Councillor Massey raises on a regular basis. I'm sure if she had been here, she would have done that too. So full marks for corroborating that. Dr. Williams.
Thank you, Chair. So slightly different angle, if you like. I think when, so I've been here since 2015, not continuously, but since the start. And I think certainly the business members of the GCP and probably many of the councillors, the shorthand for GCP or City Deal as another time was sorting out the congestion in Cambridge. And I think if I went to talk to businesses, the small and medium-sized businesses now, that would still be their shorthand. The City Deal is something about sorting out congestion in Cambridge. 4 years down the line, we still haven't got any further than coming up with some principles. So there's an interest. We've all been very positive about things so far, but that's where we are, and we've been told not to dwell on the past many times, and I'm not going to get slapped on the wrist for that again. I guess I'm positive in the fact that these are great overarching principles, and I have great confidence that the Assembly, working with the officers, will nail those down, get all the questions from the likes of Ian, and John, and we'll reflect on those, and we'll come up with some great suggestions. So I think that bit's going to be okay. I'm very happy with the principles. But I am wondering, we're coming up to the first gateway review, which I believe is at the end of the year. And we really need to demonstrate to central government that we're able to actually work together to come up with solutions for the whole community. What worries me is not that we can't come up with these brilliant ideas, that somewhere down the line there becomes sort of an irresolvable conflict and we end up with a suboptimal solution, which benefits nobody. It doesn't benefit the community, doesn't benefit business, and will certainly be viewed negatively by both business and central government. So perhaps you could take back to the board, Tim, those concerns.
Thank you very much, and sobering instruction there from one of our longest serving members. Thank you. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you. I was very pleased to note that in the postcode responses, CB24, CB23 and CB22 came 3rd, 4th and 5th in terms of percentage of responses. These postcodes represent the villages circling Cambridge, and I hope that this demonstrates. I understand they're close to Cambridge, so they're more likely to respond, but I think the numbers represent the strength of feeling of people in these villages that they do need better transport, and I hope that, I'm sure that will be taken on board, but I would like to know that those postcodes are fairly represented on the Citizens' Assembly as well, because I think people in those postcodes have a lot of useful input to put into what happens further down the line. Thank you.
Right then, yes, I'm glad you referred to those three particular postcodes. Of course, we're situated here in CB23, and you and I, Councillor Wilson, live in CB24, and I'm sure we have many colleagues living in CB23, and it was great to see those ranking so high in the responses. Anyone else want to say anything? Yes, Councillor. Helen Valentine. Yes.
Firstly, I, like others, welcome the positive feedback on the appetite for charging of some form, and we listed them as separate, intelligent charging and toxicity charging or pollution charging. I don't see them as separate. I'm sure that we can come up with something that hopefully helps deal with peak time congestion and the pollution problem. And a little bit like Andy, I guess I'm slightly anxious about timescales. At the moment, it suggests here that when we come back to within December, it's still not a major decision point. It's an update. Sorry. By December, all we're getting is an update rather than a kind of decision point. And I feel that we really need to be getting on with actually making some concrete proposals that require us to make some decisions so that we can start to see some impact before too long.
Very good. Dr. Wells.
Thank you, Chair. So, the risk of repetition, I welcome it. I think it's a really good report. I particularly liked the analysis in figures 17 onwards, which I think was really helpful and addressed some of the early questions we had when we first saw the data. Namely, you know, if you see an aggregate result that says half the people are in favour of something, does it mean that all of the people in one category voted for it and nobody in the other category voted for it? That's a very different situation than where half the people in all categories voted for it. And essentially what we see from the data is there's a remarkable degree of alignment between bus users and car drivers in terms of the measures. There are differences and they're interesting and they're worth exploring, but fundamentally the priorities and profiles of their responses are the same, with some interesting second order intelligence underneath. So I think pulling that out has been really useful. I would echo comments from others, which is this does seem to have taken a long time. I think we're in a much better place now than we were a year or so ago. But I mean, just urging to build and maintain and build on the momentum in terms of getting to a final decision and implementation. The principles, I think, clearly the air pollution congestion combination, I think, is very sound, and the others I have no problems with. Somewhere in there, I wonder, and if this might be under the fourth heading, is there something about transparency and performance? If we are going to be taking quite large amounts of money off one section of the community and using it to subsidise bus travel, you know, and we're promising it's ring-fenced, do we need to be really thinking about the transparency of that process so that we can be clear and it's obvious that we are upholding that promise? Hypothecated taxes are not normal in the UK, so we're trying to do something that's a bit out of the ordinary. So I think we might need very high levels of transparency around that. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else have anything to say? Well, I'm going to take you on a bit of a paper trail, members, so you probably will get quite angry with me for the way I'm going to proceed, but it's just the way I've pieced things together. And so I'm going to start at the top of page 113, because we have touched on low income, and I read from paragraph 2.1.2 that this report addressed the CATI survey, but I don't think I found the returns from the focus groups with young people and those on low income. Are those still to come, or yeah?
They're still to come.
They're still to come, right. That's very valuable, because I think it's very important, given the number of concerns that are raised, particularly by young people who and their parents who find the prospect of transport to the sixth form colleges at Hills Road and Long Road really quite shocking. It's about £750 a year, for example. The young people, I think, will have a key important role to play, and we've already heard from one of our members about being careful to address those on low income. I was quite touched, quite impressed actually, by the reference in the middle of paragraph 1.15 on page 111 to the fact that in the previous part of this exercise, in the big conversation, that is to say, over half of car and van users would like to make more of their journeys without their vehicle, and that seems consistent with the approximately 50% return of support that we've had across all the answers in this exercise. Some people wish to make use of that time in ways other than merely getting to work more quickly, and I was quite amused on page 89 that of course some respondents want to use their commuting time productively for working, studying and leisure activities such as reading, and the fact that public transport is often more relaxing. But I was also chuckled that it would also facilitate post-work leisure activities, including drinking alcohol. And so the prospect of an after-work drink may not be such a trauma for people as it has been up to now, in terms of having to decline that invitation. I'm looking at page 64 next. Because when I looked through the principles, I couldn't quite be sure, and this to some extent picks up the Cottenham question, that respondents felt that more enhanced integrated public transport routes were needed, and particularly respondents felt that there should be more circular routes around Cambridge. And I don't think I picked up circular routes in A to N, and perhaps I've missed that. Perhaps I'm not interpreting the list correctly, but I mean the call for more circular routes comes on a fairly regular basis, and I'm just curious that we hadn't captured that. And I'm thinking particularly of something that Mr. Walkinshaw raised about the Cottenham Plus question, that not everyone, obviously some of the returns are external to external, and so yeah. So that was page 64. And then finally, I'm going to be my usual sort of stick in the mud, and I am here as a representative of Cambridgeshire County Council, and I know that Cambridgeshire County Council's currently stated position is one of considerable opposition to any form of congestion charging. I think that on page 127, some of the concerns that are raised by county councillors are expressed at the bottom of that page. So many respondents were largely supportive of possible flexible pollution road charging, but with caveats. Many had concerns over the practicalities of the measure being successfully implemented, and some had concerns over the financial aspects of the measure. And I was particularly struck by what Dr. Wells raised at the very end there about the importance of transparency and accountability. And Councillor Solomon raised this sort of chicken and egg challenge, which we had a partial answer to in terms of extending hours, and there isn't the congestion challenge there, and running services more widely in the district. There may not be quite so many congestion challenges, but nevertheless, in the centre of Cambridge at peak times, we're still going to have to clear road space before we can double the number of buses. And that staircase that Councillor Solomon referred to is one of the principal practicalities that I think is of concern to my colleagues. So that takes me to the top of page 85, that I think the principal concern that I've always been alive to is that there is a very strong feeling out there, particularly outside Cambridge City, that alternatives are not currently felt to be viable. Nevertheless, it's very clear from the debate that members in general welcome this report. I think Councillor Bick led us off clearly in that. Councillor Williams and Councillor Solomon were broadly answered during the meeting. There was the raised again the question of affordability, but he was particularly keen that we should continue the level of engagement that we seem to have established. Obviously, that could be difficult because there's choices for better journeys was a particularly demanding piece of work. So we may not be able to keep up that same level of intensity of engagement, but we should not lose the opportunity to take people with us, because while Dr. Williams and Dr. Wells and Helen Valentine, all of them raised this anxiety that we've been here for 4 years, and the only stage we seem to have reached so far is to be agreeing a set of principles. I think we have witnessed quite a shift in mood in general amongst our residents, and that has not been easily achieved. And so I think we need to continue to tread quite carefully, I think. All the same, Dr. Williams, I will convey that point to the Executive Board. I'm not entirely sure of the difficulty between distinguishing a toxicity charge and a general intelligent flexible charge, but maybe the officer can pick that up as to what the practicalities of that are. Yes, Dr. Wells, I too, when you look at the cross-tabulation of the modes of transport that people use and their attitude towards some of these measures, it seems broadly similar. Cyclists, as you probably would imagine, are often more radically in favour of some of them than others, but I thought I was quite pleasantly surprised to see how much car commuters and others were also quite broadly supportive of these measures. Have I captured the discussion to your satisfaction, members? Because I think this is going to be still quite a rough ride, But we seem to have a very strong momentum behind us at the moment, and I think, as Dr. Wells said, we must maintain that and build on it. So over to you, officers.
Thank you, Chair. I suppose two particular comments. One is around the public transport offer. Absolutely agree that local authority boundaries do not reflect the journey to work area, and we need to be thinking beyond that. I've said before, we need to paint the picture of exactly what that is. So we are working with the combined authority and the consultants they use for their previous bus review, and I've requested that they come forward with a public transport network that is capable of supporting the package of measures that we're looking at. So when we bring this back round, there will be a network map, frequencies, geographic coverage, so a real sense of what the public transport offer looks like. And the chair will ask me again how much it's going to cost, and I will be able to give him a little bit more than £20 million. It does lead into some of the conversations we've had about vehicle type, because if we are specifying electric vehicles, the cost will be more. If we are specifying fare reductions, the cost will be more. And it's easy to say we'd like this, this and this, but if we're saying that it needs to be cost neutral within a charging environment, then the charging income needs to reflect that. I think the transparency is a good point, and certainly Transport for London, when they introduced the congestion charge and increased bus services associated with that, they've published what they do with the congestion charge income. So I think there's clearly a message there. And I suppose in terms of the sort of the urgency message, and I don't want to detract from the chair's role of feeding that to the executive board, but I suppose reflecting upon where the city deal is now and where it's come from, I think it was originally envisaged as an infrastructure project. And so what we don't discuss when we discuss this particular agenda item is we need to deliver all of the other schemes we're talking about. We need to deliver the Junction 11 Park and Ride, we need to deliver Cambridge South East, we need to deliver Cambridge South Station, and we need to do that as quickly and as efficiently and as effectively with public engagement as we can. And that in addition to that, we're looking at what public transport service provision we need to overlay to better deliver the challenge that we've set ourselves. So absolutely take the point on urgency, but I think actually the city deal and its strategy and objectives have grown in the last couple of years particularly, and this agenda item reflects that growth. And the chair's right, this isn't easy, but it reflects that growth. But we can't lose the fact that we need to have a focus on delivering to time and to budget all of the infrastructure sort of interventions that we are talking about.
Very good. So, yes, please do.
So I guess my concern is less about timing and more about our ability to make decisions. Okay.
Then we'll leave that for the board.
Fortunately, that's above the officer pay grade, so we can leave that to the board.
Yes, I caught your shorthand for the city dealers sorting out congestion in Cambridge and an anxiety to avoid producing a set of proposals which were irresolvably, I can't remember the quite phrase now, but it would still be difficult to bring them into practice, I think was your concern. And indeed that reminds me that, and I think I've raised this before with officers, that the data really needs to be interpreted incredibly carefully, because I think when Greater Manchester did similar sort of exercises, they were led to believe that there was a wide willingness to countenance congestion charging, but when they had a referendum on the subject, it was rejected. So I think the moral of the story is to continue pushing ahead, but not too quickly. Okay. Very good. Thank you very much, members and officers, and indeed Mr. Stoughton for your question. And that takes us on to the next item, which is item 9. And for those who haven't got the page number, it's 153. So the Southwest Travel Hub, I'm going to start by taking the public question, then I'm going to hear the officer's response to that. He's then going to present the report, and we will then have our discussion. So, I have John Hammond, is that right? And, oh no, sorry, I don't have John Hammond, I have Councillor Solomon on his behalf. Yes, I'm so sorry, because it had been brought to my attention earlier that, that you are acting as his voice. Not necessarily, these are not necessarily your views, you are acting as his voice. Yes, thank you.
Yes, Hawkston Parish Council, who John is representing in this question, is one of my district council parishes. And I have offered to read out the question, which is all I'll be doing. So, Hawkston Parish Council is very disappointed that the proposed option of a tunnel under the A10 providing free-flowing access to the park and ride has been dropped. As the proposed park and ride is located in our parish against the expressed wishes of the parish council and the community, can the GCP please explain what effect the planned 4 sets of traffic lights between London Road, Harston and the M11 roundabout is forecast to have on the existing traffic congestion and resultant pollution, particularly during peak periods in Hawkston and Harston? And what arrangements, financial or otherwise, have been made to ameliorate the impact on residents of Hawkston?
Yep.
Thank you. So, entirely correct. The report and the business case make clear that a tunnel is not provided for because the costs of the tunnel outweigh the benefits that would be delivered. The traffic management arrangements that are proposed in the scheme improve the flow of traffic around the gyratory and improve congestion in the area. Nevertheless, the report makes clear that we will continue to work, even though we're getting improvements already, we'll continue to work with the local community as we develop that to make sure that we deliver the maximum possible benefit, both in terms of congestion reduction in the area, but also in terms of wider design and other benefits, environmental improvements in the local area for the parishes. And I hope that that makes clear in the report, Chair.
Thank you. And members, you've also had a representation, I think, from Trumpington Residents Association. Everyone has received that. Just checking. Yes, that's good. Okay.
Thank you, Chair. So just to briefly update, because I know that you've seen this you've seen this scheme before. Previously, we've outlined the nature of the problem in terms of 20% projected traffic growth at this particular location. We've already got express demand for park and ride. Trumpington is full on a pretty much daily basis. And so what we have is a desire to increase and improve the park and ride and travel hub provision in the area. We previously sought approval to go out for public consultation, and the public consultation said that there is support for a new site to the west of the M11. But again, the report makes clear that not everybody supports that, and the local communities in particular have raised concerns around both the impact in terms of congestion in the area, which hopefully we've explained the traffic management actually is predicted to improve, but also environmental impacts in the local area. So the report will be requesting that the Executive Board endorses taking the scheme forward to planning, a planning application to complete the final designs, so we're able to bring forward that in much further detail. But also we will make reference to ongoing discussions with local communities and the local parishes as to how we develop that scheme in particular detail. I think I'll leave it there, Chair, but obviously we'll happily take any questions.
Right then, members. Yes, Councillor Solomon.
Okay, representing myself this time. I mean, it's unfortunate. It seems to me that it's an unfortunate place that we've got to, where a whole sequence of previous decisions have left us in a position where we're essentially outsourcing the car park for the biomedical campus 2 miles down the road. I very reluctantly accept that there is no better option at this point, but it is clearly going to impact the communities along the A10, as they've expressed in their question earlier. And I am pleased to see that recognised in paragraph 4.8, but I would like to hear, you kind of repeated what was in paragraph 4.8 in your answer to the parishes question. I would like to hear you elaborate a little bit more on that. It's you know, what and the how is not, maybe not time to specify it now, but it would be nice to have a bit more of a hint of the what and the how in terms of how those concerns are addressed. On the specifics of the design scheme, picking up on again the parish's point around the tunnels, there's a cost consideration you mentioned around tunnels. I'm still confused how a left lane slip road coming from the south, so on the northbound M11, that traffic has to cross into the travel hub. And without a tunnel, it's crossing other traffic coming in. How that does not impact, you mentioned, I think, in your answer earlier that the flow around the gyratory is improved. I'm sure it is, but the question is around the flow along the A10 and further back down, all the way to the Foxton crossing, which we've talked about before as having the breaks in the traffic at with the Foxton gate coming down on the railway is one of the few things that helps the traffic along the A10 at the moment, and people to actually be able to get onto the road in those communities. Putting that many traffic lights between Harston and the M11 junction, it is difficult to see why how that doesn't impact the traffic down the road at this stage. And I would like to understand what the cost benefit is around the tunnel decision, if we've taken that off the table already, because it's not clear from the report at all. I think that those are the main points I'd like to raise. I'm sure others will have other points around the use of the agricultural bridge and things like that. But I will leave, as the Trumpeton Residents Association raid, but I will leave my comments at that.
Okay, thank you very much. Dr. Williams.
Thank you, Chair. I would have to say I do disagree with Councillor Solom's characterisation of the, as he knows I would, characterisation of the park and ride as an outsourced car park for the biomedical campus. I think this is one of the, there's a different degree of discussions about whether we should have park and rides at all, and I'm very aware of those discussions. For me, this is a critical park and ride for Cambridge. It sits on the strategic road network, it's easily accessible. Pretty much all the schemes you see have this park and ride in it. So even the Smarter Cambridge schemes, Cambridge Connect, the CAM, all have this because it provides a way to get people off the M11 into Cambridge but not using their cars. I'm sure Peter Blake could provide us with the details, but I suspect most of the people who use the current Trumpeton Park and Ride actually go into central Cambridge, either go to the train station or go into central Cambridge. They don't actually go to the biomedical campus. The ones who do probably walk incidentally, so you won't, it's not a fair comparison, to be fair. So I suspect this new park and ride will be a strategic park and ride. Hopefully in the future it'll be used for tourists and tourist buses. It'll be used for a wide range of transport, not as a car park for the biomedical campus. And a side assumption, incidentally, I think if in the future we were to reduce the size of park and rides, I'd probably favour reducing the Trumpeton Park and Ride, even if we can get the improved access, because I see this as in a better location than the current Trumpeton Park and Ride. I wasn't going to start with that, but I thought I should. So then I'll start with my, using my old head of 2015, I'll start with my Bridget Smith moment. Figure 7, dear oh dear, you can't see the greens from the purples. There's no key, so you go back to the original outline business case, and the key in there you can't see either. So the problem, if you can't see in the, and although you can describe it to us, I think it's, again, the figures are just difficult. You might as well just print it in black and white if you don't tell us what the purple and the greens are. So I was trying to work out where the roads come off and how it all joins together. One vague thought I had as vague punishment for Peter was that I wonder if in the future we do short videos of these schemes. We used to have presentations, didn't we? I wonder if in the pre-read, there's so much more gained by a short, this is how it flows, this is how it moves. A 2 or 3 minute video would be really good. It doesn't have to be Peter, it can be somebody else, but Peter's good at it. So I wonder, and it would get us around the fact that often these diagrams are very difficult to read for those of us who want to go into the detail. And of course, then going into the detail then takes me down another rabbit hole on page, so I have to go to the OBC. Page 44, AZ's stance on Brexit is not ambiguous, as stated out by Mott MacDonald. Why Mott MacDonald are taking views on AstraZeneca's view on Brexit is beyond me anyway. If Mott MacDonald want confirmation of what the AstraZeneca view is on Brexit, they're welcome to phone me. That would be a lot quicker than what had to happen as a consequence of this. And just for confirmation, there are now nearly 3,000 AstraZeneca employees in the Cambridge area, not the more than 2,000 mentioned in the Mott MacDonald report. So I can reassure the Assembly, AstraZeneca are totally committed to Cambridge, pre and post-Brexit, and will not be impacted by any decisions by Brexit, at least within the Cambridge area. Right, so that's the first point. So let's go down to more serious points. I do agree with Councillor Solomon. I'm disturbed by the fact, having now described how wonderful this park and ride site is from a strategic perspective, access to that park and ride site is really important, that we actually do encourage buses, cars, horse and cart, everybody to use that, because that is the way that we'll get people into there, as opposed to turning right and still going to Cambridge. I couldn't figure out exactly how much that tunnel cost versus the cost benefit of that, just that particular bit of it. And I am concerned about all the traffic lights when I worked out where they were. So it's a worry. I'm not saying we have to solve it, but I'd like to have some clarity moving forward on quite how we got to that particular answer for the little tunnel. On the agricultural bridge, so the tunnel was brought up by both Harston residents and Trumpton residents. I think on the agricultural bridge, I don't think that it's necessarily as indirect as Trumpton residents mentioned, but I do worry about the proportion of the country park it takes up. And I guess when I looked at the diagram, it sort of gets over the bridge and then it takes a screaming left turn. And I guess my concern is when we actually then come to the real thing, that the screaming left turn becomes a wider loop and taking up more of the country park, and whether it would be better if we just said, look, it's a junction, the buses actually turn there, and we somehow constrain them there. And then the thing that's worrying for me is, in the report it says slightly adverse impact on country park. In the Trumpton Residents Association's response, it's a significant adverse effect. And we've been here before. One person's slight is another person's significant, and very difficult for Assembly members to actually take a view on it. And I'm not quite sure how we get there, but I do worry that if we end up with this big loop, wipe out half the country park, that actually that's not really going to be the case. And again, I'm not sure what the solution is, but I'd suggest we need to get closer to what slightly and significant means, and what would then be acceptable and what's not acceptable in terms of the take of that. And then finally, I did also begin the point that, again, having to then troll through the whole outline business case, which is hundreds of pages long. The amount of work that goes into these reports is enormous. I did see reference to the A1309 bus improvements and potential improvements down beyond Trumpton, down there. And I remember they appeared in the last report, but not in this report. Does that mean they're now separate, or how are we progressing those further improvements down Trumpton High Street? Because obviously now we're making it easy for cars, hopefully, to get off the M11. I like the idea of an M11 slip road, by the way. It would be nice if then they could continue their journey down Trumpton Road more effectively as well. So I know it's quite a long question, but there's quite a few points hopefully picked up there.
Yes, Councillor Bick.
I was going to also make Andy Williams' third point about the further measures that had originally been discussed for the stretch of Trumpington Road, Hawkston Road, and ask where they are and when we are going to be able to see them. But I also wanted to make something of this issue relating to the agricultural bridge, because it's a point I have raised repeatedly before in the way when this item and this project has come up. And I think that there is something quite important here if we stand back from the technicalities for a moment, that the Trumpington Country Park was an essential piece of mitigation for the new development at Trumpington. It's the sort of thing that led to residents being relatively supportive of that development and keen to integrate it into the older version of Trumpington. And so to come along so soon and to degrade part of it is something that I think we ought to take very seriously indeed. Now, I can't judge all the technicalities, but it does seem quite a circuitous route as well. But my main point is, could we please ask the board to keep an option open for evaluating the alternative, which would be a bridge closer to the roundabout, the interchange on the M11, which would, I think, have much lower impact on the country park, would, I think, have zero impact on the Melbourne Cycleway, which is another project of ours, which we ought to care about as well. I am just very concerned that we are disturbing something which is very, very fresh in residents' minds about what justice looks like around growth and new development. And we're imposing a new version of what looks right very, very soon after people have accepted already a lot of change. So the question is, can we keep that option open of not using the agricultural bridge as this goes forward? I personally believe that the fundamental issue in this paper about the choice of site for the travel hub is what's envisaged here is the right one for me. It's the issue is about this agricultural bridge and the impact on the country park.
Yes, Helen Valentine.
Thank you. A couple of points, particularly relating to the Trumpington Residents Association paper, which I've found pretty helpful. I think they've obviously spent a lot of time making quite constructive suggestions. One of the things that they say there is that the new park and ride stroke travel hub needs to have the same facilities as existing park and rides, and that they've written to the mayor to say they don't agree with his stance on this, and I think I echo that. If we want people to use a new park and ride, then it needs to be somewhere that you're not just huddling under some kind of shelter, but can go to the loo and can do one or two of the other things that they'd expect to be able to do. And the other thing that that they say that I think is worth emphasising is that there's very, or relatively little, mention of cycling and walking in our paper, and that we perhaps haven't placed enough emphasis on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, right. I have Mr. Walkinshaw next. Yeah.
Thank you. A quick question. I welcome the proposal. I think it is a great solution. And I welcome particularly the report starts by talking about the scale of the challenge growing over the next 10 years in that area and the number of people using that side of town and needing to increase access. Forgive me if I have completely missed it. I have tried to look through the report backwards and forwards. I don't see anything which indicates the scale of the proposed park and ride that we're talking about there and what its opportunities are, whether it's straight to full size, up in stages, coming back down, obviously we've talked about as maybe something in the longer term future. But forgive me if I've missed it, but it doesn't give me any hint whether we're planning to provide the spaces that are identified earlier in the report. Thank you.
I have Councillor Williams next.
Thank you. In the last report, we had a great play about transparency, and I feel that we're not being completely straightforward on this. If you look at paragraph 3.12, it's quite clear that this park and ride, and don't tell the mayor, but is actually part of the CAM metro network. In fact, it's shown on a diagram as Trumpington P&R. So, you know, if it's going to be part of the tram network or CAM metro network, it can't possibly be using the existing road bridge, junction bridge over the M11, and will therefore need to use a separate bridge. And that separate bridge at the moment is the agricultural bridge. And the fact that it's going to be part of CAM means that there'll be limitations to the curvature of the busway to ensure that it will be able to accommodate the CAM metro when it comes along. So I think we should be being honest with people and actually say, at the moment, the route, the busway route to this park and ride will be via the agricultural bridge. And I think we are being disingenuous if we suggest that that routing will be over the existing junction, because it will not be compatible with the CAM metro. And paragraph 3.12 specifically says it needs to be compatible with the CAM metro proposal. Also, picking up the point about the mayor saying he doesn't like park and rides and this should be temporary, given the fact that this will be a terminus of his CAM metro, I don't see it being a semi-permanent or temporary arrangement. It will be a proper travel hub with all the facilities, and that will mean that it will be a substantial development. So let's not, you know, I agree with this, but let's not, you know, pretend something that it isn't. It is a proper travel hub. It will be quite a sizable feature, and it will be connected to the city by a link that's got to be available for the CAM metro, and in that way it's got to have its own separate bridge across the M11, and at the moment the only bridge available to do that is the agricultural bridge.
All right then. And Dr. Wells.
Thank you, Chair. I have two brief points. Picking up on Helen's point about Trumpington Park and Ride versus the new one, it would seem to me, not at this stage, but at the next stage, there's perhaps some thought to be given about what is the purpose, the distinct purpose of the two. Does it make sense to replicate all of the facilities in the current Trumpington Park and Ride and put that on the new one? Or do you aim the two at slightly different audiences? Clearly, northbound M11 traffic is probably going to prefer the new one than the old, for example. But what are we going to do about tourist buses if we want to decant occupants into local transport or get them for another mode of transport? We've talked at other times about aggregating and distributing goods from heavy goods vehicles at a point outside the city into sort of local delivery. So it's the John Lewis system scaled up. So is there a use of one of the existing park and ride or part of the new park and ride to provide some of those, as opposed to simply creating two cloned park and rides in the current mould? I say, I'm not surprised not to see it now, but perhaps in the next stage it's worth thinking that through. The second one is about what in this report is shown as figure 2. It's our tube map, which appears in all papers now, it appears, as a mandatory piece of context. And in this regard, I wonder if are we missing a trick in that we're not showing a possible Foxton Park and Ride. And if I read the slightly cryptic map, in fact, the A10 never crosses the railway line, which it does. So, you know, to address, I mean, it sort of sounds flippant, but to address the Hawkston residence issues, one of the compensating benefits could be that with a Foxton Park and Ride, some of the longer distance traffic would be transferred to rail and wouldn't be going through those villages, and that's a sort of an offsetting issue. And it just seems to be a bit incomplete not to have that as a sort of a reminder there. Thank you.
Anyone else then? Right, so I'll avoid the clash of characterisations of car parking relative to Cambridge Biomedical Campus. But Councillor Solomon was concerned about the what and the how, and made quite a good point, I think, about the conflict of traffic without a separate, without a tunnel. Yes, you're not the first to raise this point that actually the Foxton level crossing in breaking the traffic is actually quite helpful to those close to Cambridge. Dr. Williams praised this as a strategic intervention and felt that we should view it in that sense. He would find it very helpful if we could do some videos in our future presentations. And in fact, the whole question of enabling visualization of data is one that I think we are addressing, but we'll hear more about that later. He and indeed Councillor Bick were keen to know what had happened to improvements to further into Trumpington Road and closer into Cambridge. Councillor Bick was also wanting to know whether we should invite the board to keep open the possibility of an alternative, and in his view, because the country park at Trumpington Meadows was such a key element of the mitigation of the urban extensions on Cambridge Southern Fringe, that we should think very carefully before chipping away at it so soon after its implementation. Helen Valentine picked up some of the comments from the Trumpington Residents Association, and she felt that the new park and ride should have all the expected facilities. There's also a concern that cycling and walking have not been thought of as much as they ought to have been. Some confusion about the scale of the operation and the phasing. Is it all going to be done at once, or is it going to be done in stages? Councillor Williams was very anxious about the transparency, and that if this is to be genuinely CAM compliant, and given the curvature limitations of a tracked vehicle, are we being honest with people? I think sums up his approach. And Dr. Wells said, well, okay, he probably does need some facilities, but should they be complementary to those at the existing Trumpington Park and Ride? And secondly, are we missing a trick by not mentioning the possibility of a Foxton Park and Ride or Park and Rail, because that could help to alleviate some of the concerns held in Hawkston. I think I've captured all the points there, I hope. So, can we have a set of responses, please?
Thank you, Chair. So just to start by confirming that we'll remove all references to Brexit out of the business case. I'm going to jump around just to try and make this flow a bit. So if I start with the sort of the CAM alignment issue, which is important to demonstrate that the location is aligned with the outlined CAM proposals. But what we're not doing is delivering carriageway for a CAM system to come forward. We're simply looking at short-term park and ride facilities and improvement. So we need to reflect the location, and we need to reflect design standards, of which a little bit more in a minute. But what we're not doing is we're not building the carriageway or facilitating that for CAM. CAM, if we recall, is probably towards the end of the next decade, and will come forward with its own business cases and set of proposals. Nevertheless, I think you're right around the general alignment issue. The Strategic Transport Authority and the Mayor have made clear that they wish to see park and ride be temporary in nature, and we need to reflect that. And I think in the previous iteration of this, I reflected that by saying the tunnel would be challenging to argue that that was temporary in nature. And so that in itself would probably lead us away from that. The cost of the tunnel will run into tens of millions of pounds to deliver it. So there's a financial reason as well, but actually I think there's also quite an important strategic issue. Nevertheless, to deliver a park and ride sign, and I think probably in terms of articulating this, I could have brought this out, in terms of the delivery mechanism for this is a planning application. So we will be going to the local planning authority with all of the consultation, design standards and everything else that they will expect to see. So the challenge that I think you've rightly raised around the green, the sort of the green environment in the Trumpington area, in terms of what it looks like facilities-wise and everything else, we will need to go through that process with the local planning authority to do that. So that will involve the local community, but I think what we're also saying, and if not clear enough, we'll bring that out more, that actually the sooner we start engaging the local community on things like not just visual amenity and how we can improve that, but also how do we ensure the local community can benefit from walking and cycling access to this site so they can gain access to the buses. That I think needs to be brought out more, and we can confirm. So the reason why the Trumpington Road is not in this is because we were trying to simply get on with taking this forward. So the decision that will go to the executive board is around submit a planning application and go through that process. The Trumpington Road, which does sit very closely with the Greenways development, the work that's ongoing there, is delivered under Highways powers and will be brought back to you at a separate plan with scheme designs, much as we've gone through Milton and Histon Road and that level of consultation, because consultation rests with us on that issue, not the planning authority, as is this case. So cycling and walking will be an integral part of this, and we will pull that out in terms of the planning issue. Foxton, I think, entirely take the point, and we'll reflect on that in terms of how we articulate this. The two park and ride issue, I think, sits within the sort of the emerging local plan conversation. There's clearly a short-term issue in terms of how we encourage appropriate management of both sites to minimise the sort of the movement around the junction to deliver benefit. But I think there is then a wider conversation about the sort of land uses there, which fortunately doesn't fall to me to have to progress. The constraint in the area is the gyratory. So as you know, you see, a motorway is fairly unconstrained because it's just not impacted by gyratories, so traffic can move and can move at higher speeds. The problem in this area is the gyratory isn't effectively big enough to cater for the volume of traffic that's going through at peak times. Now, there is not a single answer other than you come up with some sort of grade separated facility, so you have a bridge on a bridge. In this area, you're looking at a whole series of smaller interventions that together will increase capacity. So some of it is about more slip road capacity. Some of it is around greater carriageway capacity on the gyratory. Some of it is around managing the flow of traffic. So the example that you used on Foxton, and we discussed this, didn't we, in terms of the one of the disbenefits of actually getting rid of the Foxton crossing was there would be a steady stream of traffic. The traffic lights in this facility will manage that flow a bit better. There's a lot of discussion we need to take place in terms of that detailed design of exactly what that looks like. But having connected traffic lights that manage a flow more evenly means that the junction doesn't or is less susceptible to sort of congestion issues. It's 2,000 spaces. So it would meet all of the requirements that we've outlined to deliver that. I know I've missed something, Chair. Is there anything that... Agricultural bridge. So the agricultural bridge will form part of the planning application in all of its ills in terms of what the alignments look like, the impact in terms of the country park. All of these will be issues that will be considered by the local planning authority, and we will need to have demonstrated that we are minimising the impact on the local area. We're maximising the benefit through the process. So the report to the executive board will not be saying this is the final design because, You can't necessarily make that out in terms of the detail here, but that will give consent to working up with the local planning authority an application that will need to consider and pick up on a number of these issues that you've raised.
Yes, Councillor wants to come back.
Could I just come back on that in relation to the agricultural bridge? So you are saying you're knocking on the head the idea that we keep open an option other than the agricultural bridge?
The work to date is saying that the agricultural bridge would be the preferred option. But what we're not saying we will not continue to do any more work. Some of the challenges around the gyratory are putting more capacity in. If we can do that, and we can deliver a benefit so public transport services can go through it, well, why would we not use that asset? So that work, happy to confirm that work will continue, but at the moment, the indications are that the preferred option would be the agricultural bridge.
Right. And is it going to be all at once? The whole thing's going to be done all in one or in stages?
Sorry, so the likelihood is that it would be delivered out in stages, and I think some of that will be just reflecting the general growth in the area. Some of that will be working with the local community as to how that can be better managed. So I think in terms of a delivery plan, that's something that we would look to work through with local stakeholders.
Yes, and just before we bring Councillor Sullivan again, when Dr Williams said that he'd like to see the business case for and against the tunnel, were you saying that because a tunnel would not be compatible with the notion of a temporary structure, well, that's how you answered that? Am I right in that?
So I mean, I think when we've had this report previously, my recollection has been that I've said that. I think a tunnel is not compatible with the temporary nature of a park and ride. So the only caveat I would say to that is that the park and ride facilities question is subject to the local planning authority, and we need to work to ensure that the facilities reflect the requirements, and I will fully expect the local planning authority to say there needs to be facilities there because people might be travelling some distance and they may require to use amenities before they get on a local bus. But nevertheless, the cost of the tunnel runs into tens of millions, and I'm happy to provide that in detail separately to
Okay. You've got one satisfied customer, but let's see what we can do for Councillor Solomon. Yeah.
I didn't hear, other than again restating the commitment to engage with the communities, which I'm happy with, and to engage immediately, I'm also happy with, but it's not clear how, and the GCP, rightly or wrongly, has a reputation for not engaging well with local communities on infrastructure projects in their backyard. So just to elaborate on how that is envisaged, I would appreciate, just to pick up on one other aspect that you mentioned, and then I will be quiet. Working with those local communities on better cycling and walking provision to that site, I'm sure will be appreciated, but they are still, particularly Harston, which will possibly be more affected than Hawkston, is still some considerable distance away. So is there room for considering public transport benefits in accessing those sites? So either the buses maybe start their journey farther out, for example, and actually start in Harston and go to the park and ride on their way through. And given that there is a Foxton travel hub as well, does that provide a natural point? Yes, most people at the Foxton travel hub will want to get on the rail connection, but there may be some that want to just get up the road to Harston. There will be people that can then get on at Harston, and there will be people that can get on at the park and ride. Is that can that be included in that kind of discussion?
I think the public transport offer very much falls within our previous conversation around building a network that can serve in this instance, a rural area and rural villages. Clearly, linking in local villages to a facility like this would appear to be beneficial. We just need the wherewithal as to how we will do that. In terms of approaching the local communities, we're not going to leave this to the planning application process. So, subject to the executive board saying, yes, we're content that to commence with a detailed design and planning application, we will approach the communities in advance of the planning application process, and we were happy to have the discussions around mitigation and if possible, environmental enhancement around this facility.
Can I just...
Yes, please, yeah.
So I suppose the only thing I would add in terms of that connectivity to hubs as part of our smart work stream, we're also talking very much about different solutions, mobility as a service, so we don't have to necessarily think about a traditional bus that picks up and takes. We are also exploring more innovative ways of delivering people to the hubs, so just not to lose sight of that as well.
So just before closing this item, I just want to make sure that we're all familiar with the next steps and milestones which are listed on page 162, that what will be coming to the Executive Board is the final option recommendation. But as we've heard, the actual detailed design will then proceed to take a little while, leading up to an application for planning permission. And it's through the planning application that many of the concerns that were raised this afternoon will be mediated. Everyone comfortable with all that? Yes? Okay, right, good. Okay, so that completes that item, and so we now move on to item 10. I'm delighted that we have with us the chairperson of the Local Liaison Forum, and I'll start by inviting him to come up and give us a presentation. We then have a public question, so I will be inviting Councillor McGurty to make that question. Then we'll have the officer's response to the question, then we'll have the presentation, and then we'll have our discussion. So, can I start by inviting, yes, Councillor Orji to, sorry, you see, this is what happens, because I automatically introduce most people as councillor. I introduce you because, of course, you have a long history as a councillor, but I think at the moment you are not a councillor, but you are still Mr. Tony Orji.
Sorry.
And an honorary alderman, if I could just remind you. I'm going to report on the local liaison, the local liaison forums workshop on the 7th of May, and then the meeting that we had 2 days ago on the 6th of June. We discussed or had a presentation on the phase 1 interventions. These are a series of 17 interventions along the line of the 1307, 3 of which have already been completed, and everyone was very happy to receive a timetable for the remaining works, which should be completed within the next 2 years. There was a question about the impact of one of the interventions already completed, and that was the traffic lights at the entrance to Linton Village College. It was felt that some information would be helpful about just how effective these traffic lights it was a conversion of the existing traffic lights to a smarter version to ease traffic flow. So it was felt that it would be helpful to have some information about that, but it was pointed out that initially there had been some interference with those traffic lights from vehicles parked on the Linton Village College site, which was sometimes triggering the traffic lights when no traffic actually wanted to get onto the road. So I think some further robust data would be helpful there. There were questions about speed limit changes at particular junctions and along the route. It was reported by Mr. Munro that this was not supported by the police, but it was felt that average speed cameras would have an impact on speeds in general. It was confirmed there'd be no right turn, that the no right turn out of Linton would not be progressed. There was clarification about movements at the Dean Cross roundabouts. There were questions about when would there be consultation on the Linton Greenway. concerns about the need to reduce heavy goods vehicles on the road, and also the feeling that wouldn't the introduction of more traffic signals on the route also lead to congestion and slowing down traffic. The local liaison forum had met in November, and at that point, that was just after McDonald's had been appointed to carry out the detailed work on these schemes. It was a clear message from that meeting that McDonald needed to work closely with locally elected representatives, parish, district and council, county council, and with stakeholders along the route to make sure that the details of the proposals worked up were as good as they could be. It was noted that a number of meetings had taken place with bodies such as Baberham Parish Council and Linton Parish Council, and if there was such a thing as a recommendation coming from the local liaison forum, it was that in working up the remaining schemes there should be continued close working with local parishes, district councils, county councils and stakeholders. So that was a very clear message, and as I say, there's been a lot of working together that's already taken place. Looking at phase 2 of the work, which is all about the off-highway strategy and routes for that proposal and sites for park and ride sites, there were some general points that were made. I think it's fair to say that there was a great deal of confusion about the relationship between the various bodies and authorities involved in the work. And it was felt that it would really be useful for not only this particular part of the overall work, but in general, if there was some diagrammatic representation of the interrelationship of all the bodies working together, and also some diagrammatic relationship of all the strategies, plans and policies, because it is very confusing to many people. And sometimes at local liaison meetings, sometimes there are people who come along to every single meeting, but often people come along when they have particular interest at particular parts of the route. And so not everyone has attended every meeting and is au fait with exactly how everything is organised. So it was a very strong feeling that would be very, very helpful to have some diagrammatic representation. It was also felt very unfortunate that the local liaison forum meeting was only 2 days before this meeting. I should say that that was an issue beyond our ability to influence, because a meeting had been arranged much earlier, but unfortunately that was delayed because we couldn't run into the times when elections were taking place. So those meetings had to wait until the elections were out of the way. There were some general comments, for example, the Huawei proposals, forthcoming proposals on the Sawston bypass, and the fact that one of the representatives at the meeting came from Haverhill and talked about more fairly massive expansion in Haverhill, and there was a question about had all this additional, very recent information, was that being built into all the figures that were being presented. It was also felt there was a need for more joined-up working. For example, the person from Haverhill indicated there'd been no contact with Haverhill or Bury St Edmunds. And it's also a question that was illustrated by one of the slides which showed the total CAM network and then pointed out on that which were the particular parts that were being developed by the Greater Cambridge Partnership and which by the Combined Authority. So we've got the bit between the Cambridge Biomedical Campus and the Four Wentways Granter Park area is GCP, but the extension, proposed extension to Haverhill, that's the Combined Authority and the Mayor. And when you looked at the 3 particular sites which are being put forward for consultation, or likely to be put forward in the consultation for a park and ride site, there was no indication of how these related to any future extension onto Haverhill and whether those locations would be appropriate in view of that longer term aspiration. It was also felt that environmental and ecological issues hadn't been given sufficient prominence. For example, all 3 sites are on high-quality agricultural land, so there was that issue as well. And there was also some continued support for a light rail system and greater clarification about where traffic movements were coming from. And there are also some generic points which could apply to more than this particular scheme. It was felt, what about bus pricing? That was an issue, okay, specifically related to these particular sites, but could apply to any of the proposals being put forward. And it was felt that at present, in this area, you pay the full price. It's the outer zone of Stagecoach's canvassing, pricing policy. There's a question of could park and ride sites be used at night for lorry parking? And also traffic modelling. Had that work been carried out in relation to potential sites to indicate what consequences would arise from traffic seeking to enter and leave these sites? Because otherwise, in a sense, to suggest, well, this site, I might prefer that site to this one, well, there might be actual traffic constraints which mitigated against that. And finally, there were specific comments. One of them is already referred to in your agenda papers in paragraph 5.31, and that was an alternative route along the disused railway line going as far as Great Shelford Station as you come up from the Pampisford end. That was raised at the workshop and at the LLF meeting, and some people will continue to support that. If that wasn't the case, then there was a felt for environmental work on the route near Great Shelford, Stapleford, as this route would be going through Greenbelt, and would something like a cutting would be helpful to alleviate some of the environmental impacts of such a route. And also, there was a feeling that going close to the edge of Stapleford and Great Shelford, it would actually work against easy traffic movements within the village. I didn't know whether Councillor McGurty was going to be taken first, because I do want to pick up on what his question's all about. I should say that the alternative site referred to in his question was actually raised at the workshop in May. And therefore I was quite surprised to see no reference to it in the agenda papers today. I was also quite surprised by the figures quoted in paragraph 5.26 and 5.7, because they didn't reflect my perception of the responses. We had people grouped in various tables at the workshop, and from the responses from individual tables, I would have thought my perception was there was a wider range of opinion than suggested by the figures in the table. And significantly, there was support for the alternative that Councillor McGurty is talking about in his question. There was something that maybe park and ride side further out from Cambridge would be beneficial, although that has been raised before and that has been answered before. And then there were some comments which I think referred particularly to Site C. How would there not be congestion at the roundabout entrance to the site? What would be the traffic implications of traffic crossing, going round and roundabout to get into the site, but then stopping traffic or halting traffic coming down from the north? How close was the site to houses? What would be the consequences for traffic flow through the village? And how would the site accommodate Granta Park and Baybram Research Campus traffic? So there were some specific comments and some of a more general nature, and I hope that what I've said has been helpful.
Yes, it certainly has. Thank you very much. Does any member have any question of clarification before we release Mr. Orji? No? Thank you very much. That was very comprehensive and much appreciated. Thank you very much. So we will now have the question from Councillor McGurty, please. If you could come up.
Thank you, Chair. And given the criticisms that I've levelled in the question. I think it's important to start by thanking the officers for what is really an excellent report, and particularly Tony and Andrew for their tireless work on this project. It's really good to see this coming forward in the phases that it is. There are spades in the ground, there are safety improvements already being delivered in the area, and I think that's really important to highlight my general supportiveness for the scheme. So it's really phase 2 that we're concentrating our questions on today. And the background to that really is that the majority of the member bodies of the Assembly have recently all declared a climate emergency. And I think that's really important to bear in mind when we're looking at the range of sites that have come forwards for consideration here, because there are 11 sites on the map on page 169 of the agenda. And along with the various route alignments, that's provided an impressive 231 combinations that were up for consideration at the various LLF meetings. And the workshop was really well attended and really well constructed. And so if you look at sections 517 to 525, they discuss sites 5, 7 and 9 in a little more detail. And I think it's clear to see the real bias towards site 5, where it talks warmly of site 5 being outside the green belt, easy to access, easy to develop, not constrained by its size. I think it's quite clear that that's the preferred site at this point. And so it's perhaps surprising to see in section 526 that really the numbers seem to conveniently fit that consideration of site 5 being strongly supported by the LLF workshop. And as I said, I don't consider that was the case, and I think that Tony's just alluded to that as well. That wasn't the strength of feeling in the room. So my question is really in 2 parts, and it's about transparency. Because maybe there are really good reasons why the Four Wentways Comfort Cafe site has not even been included on the long list of sites for consideration here. You've got 11 sites, only 1 brownfield site in the entire area, and it's not even up for consideration. So why is that site not being considered? But more importantly, can the public have an opportunity to discuss and scrutinise the decisions that are being made around the inclusion of that site or otherwise? Thank you.
Right then, thank you very much. So, shall we start with an answer to that question?
Thank you, Chair. The report doesn't have any preference on site. The report is, when it goes to the Executive Board, will request that we go out to formal consultations. So actually we gauge people's views as part of the process. What we're obliged to do, government tells us we need to go through a sifting process. So it was referred to the 231 combinations that we've gone through. And we need to understand what various sites and route options can deliver. We actually looked at the brownfield site, and the brownfield site isn't big enough to accommodate a park and ride site that would be required in the area. More than that, we actually looked at, well, can you look around it? And there's agricultural land on one side, and then there's the Travelodge and service station. So we examined the wider area to see whether it would fit. And the difficulty we have is, obviously, the brownfield site is subject to some discussions already in terms of development there, and then any relocation of a hotel and a service station adds considerable costs, which reduces markedly the benefits. So we looked at the site. The site doesn't meet the objectives through which we're obliged to assess these schemes on. Nevertheless, we are going through a public consultation, and that will give local communities and local residents the opportunity to feedback on the proposals.
Right then, thank you very much. I did have a meeting at Grant Park on Tuesday afternoon, and I took the opportunity of cycling along Newmarket Road, and I have to say I hadn't seen the world famous Comfort Cafe hidden behind all the concrete blocks before, and it was quite sad to see. And so I do sympathise to some extent with the desire locally to make public use of that area. But I mean, we've heard the answer from the officer, so thank you very much for. Yes, well, okay, I will let you come back to supplementary.
Well,
yes.
if I might just highlight the second part of my question, which was why I'm sure that those decisions are made for very good reasons, but why are we not making that decision in public? Because it seems to have been excluded from the list of sites that were actually open for discussion.
We go out to consultation, putting forward 231 options, is not manageable in terms of a consultation process, nor is it reasonable in terms of following Department for Transport guidance that says we need to sift the options to identify what can be reasonably delivered. If we went out with things that we couldn't deliver, I mean, I think disingenuous was used previously. That would be disingenuous in terms of saying we will go out and consult on a site that simply is not big enough to cater for the proposals that we're trying to bring forward. So I think that's the balance that we need to try and draw on this. The nature of the sifting process that government has developed over the time reflects these sort of issues. Nevertheless, when we go out to consultation, as we found with other consultations, we will outline the various options and route alignments, but that does not constrain communities and individuals in terms of their responses. So, we've often found that people will want to comment on other things. That gives the opportunity to do that. And that's the nature of consultation that forms part of, but not exclusively, the sort of the decision-making process around the delivery of major schemes.
Okay, that's. I think there's a sort of window chink slightly open there for further exploration of this particular one. So we'll have to watch that space. But I don't suppose Peter will be very pleased with me for saying that. But over to you to make the presentation, please. Yeah.
Far be it for me, Chair, to comment on anything you might say. So this report does two things. One, it just gives an update in terms of the phase one, which I think is relatively self-explanatory. Two, it starts to talk about the sort of how we develop the off-road options and how we begin to take that forward. And I think members will recall that thus far there's been strong support for the principle of it. Now we're getting into what route alignments are, where the locations are, and certainly history teaches us that's where we really start to flesh out views and opinions on developing these schemes. So what we've tried to do, I think, brought out in the questioning, is just to try and come up with a sort of a sifting approach in terms of what the options realistically are. We've come out with a number of park and ride options and route alignments, and the intention is that we will simply go out. The recommendation will be this goes out to some public consultation, and it will be the first time that we've talked in detail around route alignments and locations, and so that's always an important part of the the sort of process of developing and delivering a scheme. I think we had you will have had some correspondence from Trumpington residents that identified a number of issues that I think are quite relevant to this. And one is the Executive Board previously committed to the development of the concept of a linear park or exploring areas of opportunity. And whilst we won't be consulting on that at this point, because that very much would depend on the final route options, I think making clear that commitment exists and reflecting that in general terms in the consultation, I think would be quite important in terms of developing and sort of fleshing this out. And the other issue that they particularly reflect upon, which we are happy to sort of confirm, is that this proposal, and it relates to in part some of the issues that the chair was raising around just the number of parties involved in developing the sort of this proposal as part of a CAM proposal, working with the biomedical campus partners on how this interrelates with the rail station and things like that, is very much making sure that we weave together a single delivery proposal to make sure and give confidence to Joint Assembly and Executive Board members that these things are all being brought together very much hand in glove So there is a clear trajectory for how these things can be delivered over the coming period. I mean, I'll stop there, Chair, and then perhaps take questions.
I'm just wondering about some of the points that Mr. Orji raised. I'm thinking the suggestion of outlining who's involved and how all the strategies work together. That could be part of the consultation documentation, could it? Is that, would that be...
I think if we take that away to do our best, Chair, articulating who's doing what, and the time scales is, as you know, sort of challenging within the governance arrangements of Greater Cambridge and Greater Cambridgeshire. But I think perhaps we will do our level best to fit that within the context, this scheme within the context of the wider development agenda.
And another point I was struck by was whether we had taken fully into account the other development that is coming along the corridor and also at the end in Haverhill, and because of where this sits between the end of the Greater Cambridge Partnership bit of the CAM and the start of the Combined Authority bit of the CAM, how this scheme might relate to that interchange.
So in terms of CAM, we're in active, ongoing discussions with the Combined Authority to ensure that this is simply delivered as a phase of that scheme. So the dialogue is continuing, and the point was made earlier on about the location of the park and ride. The actual route alignment beyond the park and ride entirely falls to the Combined Authority. We just want to make sure that they understand where we're at, and that they're able to effectively move forward with their scheme from almost from our geography onwards.
And one of the other points that Mr. Orji raised, which is very close to my heart, was the value of transport modelling in the initial SIFT. I know transport modelling is actually hugely expensive and time-consuming, but I presume in the 231 options, that was the 11 sites and 21 possible routes. Is that right? What was transport modelling part of the initial SIFT?
Detailed transport modelling doesn't form part of a sort of the requirements that department lay down, not least because of the cost, complexity, and actually the time it would take to do that. So we use their appraisal process, which has been developed over a period of time. Once we then start to hone that down to a smaller number, transport modelling becomes far more relevant in terms of understanding the intricacies of that, as indeed in terms of community engagement around detailed design and the like, Chair.
Obviously, Mr. Roger raised a whole lot of other points which we've captured, but I thought those were the most important points. If other members feel that Mr. Roger made points which you particularly want to draw out, then please feel free to do so. I'll start with you, Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chair. There's a question and an observation, actually. Right, the question, first of all, is... Again, if you refer to the potential CAM network diagram on page 165, you'll see that there is a station called Granta Park. And then if you look at the routes that are being proposed, none of them serve Granta Park. In fact, the Granta Park is on the opposite side of the A11 to the potential route. Also, you managed not to serve Baybroom Science Park either. So the two major employment centres you're not serving. So I'd like to know why, certainly why you're not serving Granta Park when you know, you say this should be part of the CAM Metro, but you're not actually delivering Granta Park for it. And my observation is, it's interesting that if you serve Site C, you, of course, take on board all the difficult engineering for the CAM Metro across the A11. So we become responsible for that and no doubt pay for it. Whereas if you serve the other sites, then it's down to the Combined Authority to fund getting across the A11. So I wondered if you'd be taking that into account when you're deciding on the site.
A wicked point, Councillor Williams. Joe Sainsbury, please. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I think one of the things I want to say, so I'd welcome this report, and I think the progress from the initial phase is good. Just picking up some of the things that have been said in terms of the public comments in the LLF, in terms of taking this forward, I think my support would be that these 5 schemes, these options go to public consultation. One of the things that would be helpful is within the report, 5.5 to 5.16 actually, I think, gives a relatively good description of the sifting process already. If that could be made more succinct within that public consultation, that might perhaps mean that we get more beneficial and more positive response to it, instead of opening up additional aspects of it and potentially delaying the timescales again.
Thank you very much. I'm sure that'll be taken on board. And Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. This is the general point I want to make. In both the South West Travel Hub and the South East Transport Scheme, there is reliance on park and ride. Park and ride, by its very definition, encourages the use of cars. And we, as someone has said previously, we've all declared a climate emergency, and we should be discouraging the use of fossil fuels, if only to improve air quality and reduce our carbon footprint. My general point I would like to make is that I think in all of this we need to be quite clear that the park and ride option is for people travelling from long distances, and it isn't a replacement for good transport from local villages. So I would like to see some way in which the need for local people from local villages to travel to park and ride is not there, that it is only an option for people travelling from further away to coming towards Cambridge.
Anyone else want to speak on this one? No. I think, Mr. Blake, you're invited to respond to some, particularly Councillor Williams's points, and of course the repeated concern that Councillor Wilson makes of the fact that park and ride should also serve those not directly on the main line, as it were.
Thank you, Chair. And I think actually they're both different sides of the same issue. But just to confirm that the sifting idea and explaining that, we'll take that away. I'm sure you recall the last time I was here discussing this scheme, you told me that I shouldn't just be serving Granta Park and Babering, but also I should be serving local communities as well. I think that was an specific, and it should do both. That's right. Sorry, so my next line is actually what you can't do is if you're doing this in some form of rapid form of transport, is serve everywhere. So there will be a need for an element of compromise, but there will be a need of emphasising how local communities, or indeed Granta Park and Babering, who we've had discussions with and broadly support the sort of principles and broadly support the locations, how they can access that. So what we need to overlay this on is walking, cycling routes, much as we're talking about Harleston and Hawkston accessing that location to get public transport, but in this location too. And I think that needs to be brought out, and we need to emphasise the fact. I mean, you will have noticed, I think, in the documentation, because we are trying to move from park and ride to a travel hub. And it's a little bit difficult because park and ride's been around forever and everyone's fairly set in their mind what it is. But the concept of developing cycling facilities, charging facilities at these hubs so people can access the public transport offer not just by car. So I think we need to recognise that an awful lot of people will continue to use the car to access them. But we need to make sure that we're promoting other modes to use that. And we're looking at the stops. And so whether we need to be developing cycle parking at stops so people can access them. So it's a balance between the two we need to draw. My final line, of course, is, and you would expect me to say this, we're going out to consultation. So there isn't the secret plan under the table I'm always confused or accused of having. Actually, we want to go out, we want to listen, And I'm sure the access point will become quite important. So particularly then emphasising as we develop this walking and cycling opportunities from either the stop or the park and ride sites to various locations will become a key component of making a success of this particular scheme. I hope that covers it, Chair.
Yes, thank you very much. On page 171, members, you'll see that at paragraph 6, it shows that the proposed recommendation of the Executive Board is to take the shortlisted route options and travel hub locations to public consultation in September 2019. And I haven't picked up any grave objection to that proceeding, so okay, that completes the discussion of that item. Thank you very much. And that brings us to the quarterly progress report. Oh, I'm so sorry. Yes, I am jumping ahead of myself. Yes, I'm taking as read that we're all completely familiar with the Cambridgeshire Capacity Study, Cambridge Corridor Study, which we're bringing here partly because we helped to fund it, and how remiss of me to skip over it. So let me see what I should have done instead of jumping to the quarterly progress report. Yes, we're to receive the officer presentation.
Thank you, Chair. I'll attempt to be brief. So this was a study that we previously funded. This study does conclude that there is growth in our area that will require additional rail services and primarily will be taken forward by Network Rail. I mean, I have 2 points particularly to make on this. One is that the national level, prescribed levels of growth that Network Rail and the national rail industries will use is a lot lower than the growth we've experienced. And what this brings out is actually, if you were using greater Cambridge levels of growth, the requirements on service enhancements over the next 10 or 15 years would be greater. And I think we're going to need to continue to make that case to department and to Network Rail on that point. But I think the key element of this is actually the final point that relates to Cambridge South Station. So Cambridge South Station was taken in part of the base case. So there was an assumption in this study that Cambridge South Station will happen. We're not yet in a position where it's guaranteed to happen. In terms of all the assessments we can do, the most impactful development on our rail network is delivering that station. And so the first part's all terribly nice about looking forward to 2043 and what the rail service might or might not look like and whether we're doubling capacity from Newmarket, which we clearly want to get behind and support, but we absolutely cannot lose track and focus on getting on board and delivering Cambridge South Station as soon as that can reasonably be delivered. I'll stop there, Chair.
Right then. No, members, I'm sorry, because I did want to commend the full report to all of you. If you haven't already followed the link, it isn't an overwhelming paper. It's only 28 pages long, and unlike some of the things that Network Rail does, it's quite readable, and of course it relates to many things that are local to us, and therefore we should all have a considerable interest in. And picking up the Cambridge South Station point, don't forget that the Combined Authority is commissioning a piece of work to explore whether there are any options for an interim solution to Cambridge South Station, bearing in mind that the difficulties always of introducing a new stop is that when you stop trains in a station, you add 2 minutes to the journey time, and that causes all sorts of knock-on effects at all the gateways north and south of any particular new halt. So that's one of the complications to be addressed. So I have Councillor Williams.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. The current local transport plan is the County Council's local transport plan until the Combined Authority agrees its local transport plan after consultation. That is the local transport plan. The county local transport plan is the one currently in place, and I would have thought that would be the one that would be referred to in this study. Now, the current county local transport plan has 2 local stations on the Ipswich line at Cherry Hinton and Fulbourn, but no mention is made of that in this review. It's almost as though that policy doesn't exist in the current local transport plan. Now, it may well be that the combined authority in its new transport plan removes those local stations, but at the moment they are in the current local transport plan and they have not been assessed in this review. The other issue I've got with this is that you're not looking at any, at the moment there is an hourly service, or roughly an hourly service, 1 train an hour each way between Cambridge and Ipswich, serving Newmarket. Some of that is due to the fact that it is single tracked, apart from the passing loop at Dunningham. It is getting considerably well used because of the housing growth at Newmarket, particularly around Kennet and Red Lodge, and those people are cycling down or walking down to Kennet Station to get a train to Cambridge. Those trains are extremely busy. It's a great pity that Abelia, which is supposed to run 3-car trains on it, quite often runs a single-car train. So they're extremely overcrowded at peak times and could do. Now, what's worrying to me is that Network Rail doesn't think that the Ipswich line needs another train until 2043. I mean, it's clearly not acceptable. It's clearly, you know, with all the housing growth that's going on around Newmarket, it's not acceptable to have an hourly service to Cambridge. And there is no plans to improve the infrastructure to enable that service to be increased until 2043. So I would have thought we would have challenged this corridor study, and for 2 things. First of all, it doesn't take on board the 2 local stations that are in the current local transport plan, and which in the current local transport plan are planned to be opened by 2043, so that it was within the scope of this study. And secondly, we need a second train on the Ipswich line during the peak periods now, not in 20 years' time. So can I ask that you know, these 2 points are picked up and that we just don't just accept this study, because from my point of view, this study doesn't meet the needs of my constituents and certainly doesn't meet the needs of those who live to the east of Cambridge in what was Forest Heath. I think it's now called West Suffolk.
Right, Dr. Williams.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not going to mention Cambridge South Station, other than to note it's the single most important rail enhancement scheme in the Greater Cambridge area. I think I might be talking out of being flippant, John, because I take your point very, very seriously. And it's a similar point, I guess. We've come up with figure 6 sort of magnitude scheme costs. These are the schemes that we're pushing forward. And in previous GCP days, we've quite been reticent to get involved in Network Rail schemes because, 1, they're very expensive, and 2, it's quite difficult to influence Network Rail. So perhaps to your point, John, is, you know, we see these schemes, but it doesn't include the ones we think we need. I don't understand the mechanism. What's the interrelationship between GCP, Network Rail and others? It's fine for us to sit in this room talking about it. How are we actually going to bring influence? Are we going to fund it? Are we going to go back? We're just going to, you know, how are we going to change what is viewed by the public as the most important form of public transport?
Yes, Dr. Wells.
Perhaps related to that, what wasn't in the report, and it might be difficult to produce, but is a sense about whether these plans maintain the proportion of commuting into Cambridge at the current levels, the same proportion, or do they imply a shift towards rail or public transport? So, you know, it's fascinating, it's 6 and 7 extra services, but I don't know whether that's us actually going backwards as a proportion of total commuter traffic. So some metric that gave an insight to that, I imagine it could be tricky, I think would be a useful sort of measure. The other thing, and I can see it's not part of the scope of this report, but it does start to raise the question about, well, if there are all of these extra trains, what are the implications for Cambridge Station, drop-off parking, you know, all of the logistics around CB1 in the next 20 years? Because now is a time to be thinking about that in a sort of structural and strategic way. My final point, not that I am in any way a rail engineer, but I was puzzled by the comment in 2.3. It says there are 15 trains an hour and all 4 platforms will have no spare capacity. At least I work out that's 15 minutes per train. I was at St Pancras Thameslink on Tuesday, and they were running through there every 3 minutes on a single platform, northbound. So there's just a reality mismatch about why do 15 trains an hour max out 4 platforms? I mean, there may be a very good reason, but it's not obvious.
Yes, I mean, the island platforms 7 and 8, they work as through platforms, don't they? But 1 and 4, you have to switch the tracks. So I can see a slight delay. I accept. A good question. Anyone else have any questions raised? I mean, obviously, that point about the impact on Cambridge Central Station is interesting because, of course, one of the things that's potentially opened up by going further east in East-West Rail is an eastern access to the current Cambridge Station, because as you know, at the moment, you only get it on one side, which means that all the passengers have to file over the tracks and so on. So great potential there possibly for down the line. And the other point that was raised at the County Council's Economy and Environment Committee, where this paper was also discussed, is that in the two growth scenarios are relatively low in growth aspiration, because the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Independent Economic Review has a higher growth aspiration, and the National Infrastructure Commission in its ambitions for the Oxcam Arc greater still. So however, my understanding is that both of those higher growth rates could be accommodated by just building on the work that's in this study anyway. So it wouldn't be that the whole work would be undermined. But anyway, let the expert speak, and I'll
wouldn't go as far as say expert, Chair. So, I mean, the rail network is nationally managed. The Network Rail does not recognise local transport plans, so it doesn't recognise two additional stations. Yep. There was considerable internal discussion. They didn't want to do the second growth scenario, which is the Chair's outline, as actually not the sort of the real projections going forward for the area. So they didn't want to do that. They've done it. We've got a sense of the difference, but actually it does come back to the question, well, so what? So what are we going to do? And it may be that we just continue to petition Department of Transport or Network Rail would jolly well like you to do a little bit more in our area, or we're going to put our hand in our pockets and decide that we invest some of these things. The reality is the costs of the rail industry are always of an order that locally it's quite difficult to engage with. There are real pressures on the Newmarket corridor, and I think I've raised this a couple of times previously. You compare Newmarket to Ely, which, similar social demographics, similar distance, 10 times more people travel on rail from Ely to Cambridge than Newmarket, because the service is, and the Ely service is not perfect, but it's light years better than the Newmarket service. And so what we need to do is to understand, is there anything we can do to influence or develop that corridor in particular that doesn't require, as is written here, £151 million to double various parts of land. That's just the challenge that we've got with this type of survey, this type of study, because Network Rail manage it on a national basis. They don't, John, assess commuter trips percentage now or in the future. They're simply looking at general growth trip rates and how they can best accommodate that. But they also relate it to the sort of financial bottom line money is made in St Pancras and the like, which is why they put signalling systems in there that are far more advanced than are in Cambridge, so they can accommodate far more trains on an hourly basis. So I'm afraid, Chair, I can't leave you with answers on this one, or more just the work's been done, we're reporting back, but again, maybe just focusing on we need to get behind Cambridge South and make sure that gets delivered.
Right then. Okay, so we have noted the report. We've even considered it, which is what we're requested to do at item 5.2. Right, so now we do come to the quarterly progress report, and we'll invite Niamh and Sarah to come up and join us. Now, feel free to ask any financial related questions at any point, but because we have these 3 exam questions at paragraph 1.1, which are to consider the Mill Road closure, traffic flow and air quality monitoring, to look at the Cambridge Autonomous Metro and whether we should be contributing to the next stage of the business case work, and whether we should be taking up the invitation to invest potentially in Project Spring. I've invited Niamh to take, well, after the initial introduction, to take the sections theme by theme. So, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. That's a really helpful introduction. So, as the Chair said, we're asking for a steer or comments or updates on 3 key things. If I take them as we skim through the paper. So first, on housing and strategic planning, as always, happy to take any specific questions. But as the paper sets out, we're broadly on track to do what we specifically committed to do as part of that work stream. On skills, I am really happy to say that the new service is fully up and running and already reporting against its outputs, which is, sorry.
No. Was your question on something that's already happened, or are you into the skills?
Sorry, Chair, it's going to be on the skills paper.
Yes, okay. Well, let you finish on the skills, and then we'll bring you in. Yeah, great. Yeah.
Thank you. Just to say that the contract is up and running and already reporting, but happy to take question on that now or at the end, however you'd like to
Yeah,
do
let's
it,
take it now. Yes, let's have the question now. Yeah, right, mate.
Thank you, Chair. It's about it's item 5.4, and it's with regards to the 48 companies who have indicated an ability to create multiple apprenticeships over the course of March and April 2019. I just wondered how that was going. Because clearly, if it's March and April 2019, one would expect some activity.
So it is going, but we don't have the data yet to give us an indication of the number of apprenticeships that have happened as a result.
Chair, is there somewhere because I'm new, is there somewhere that I can look to see what's happening in this particular area of activity? No, that's it. Forgive me.
This contract was started in March this year, so we hope to have some data on the number of apprenticeships it has achieved by about March next year. It takes kind of that long for them to filter through the system. However, if you want to talk about it separate to this, I'd be really happy to do that.
Thank you, Niamh.
Thank you. Yeah, carry on. No one else on skills?
Thanks, Chair. On smart places, last time we were here, the Assembly asked us to take back a short update on the traffic flow monitoring data that will be happening across Mill Road when the bridge is closed. So there's a very short update here at section 11 and in Annex 1. If anyone has any specific questions on that, we can take those.
Yes, very good.
Forgive me, Chair. Again. It's just, again, it might be worth feeding back to GCP. There's a lot of activity taking place within the community, both sides of Mill Road Bridge, about what can be done whilst the bridge is closed, and it might be worth being aware of that, and that can actually be used maybe in some form of community consultation as well as to the future.
Thank you. I think that's a really helpful comment. Thanks. On transport, as the chair pointed out, there's a specific point on the CAM Metro, which Rachel might just want to give us a minute on.
Thanks, Niamh. Yeah, I was just going to explain, as is set out on the paper, really, that the Combined Authority has approached us. It relates to a number of times that we've touched on our relationship with CAM as the future network that we are contributing towards. And we do work as officers very closely with the Combined Authority, but they, in terms of the budget they have set for taking the SOBC that was agreed earlier this year onto an OBC, they are short of some funding to do that by about the tune of between £1 and £2 million. I'm not suggesting that GCP would wish to close that gap, but we will be asking the board whether they wish to make a contribution, which would signal further signal that we are, working very closely with them and integrated in that plan coming forward, albeit that we are, delivering our schemes as phase 1 of the CAM network. So we were interested to take back to the board an assembly view on that, if there is one, as to whether we should be making a contribution to the Combined Authority's delivery of the OBC for CAM.
Councillor Bick would like to say something on that point.
I was... I mean, I can see a case for making a small contribution to mark our desire to be regarded as partners in this process. But I'm wondering whether, in return for a contribution, we could get ourselves into a position of having a little bit more influence through the Combined Authority over this sort of matter. So if, for example, we were a Peterborough GCP, then we would be sitting with our council leader with a veto on transport matters, and therefore indicating that that was a council leader that had to be listened to in relation to a matter of this kind. But because we don't have that facility coming from either of our two council leaders within this area of Greater Cambridge, then we don't have that. Our council leaders are outvoted and there is no reason for the majority to listen to them. And I just wondered if, in relation to, if we are considering making a financial contribution, I can see a case for it, whether we could get to a position where that comes with a proviso that we had a similar role in relation to the CAM Metro on the Combined Authority. In the control of our two council leaders.
So, Dr. Williams.
Thank you, Chair. So, very supportive of the vision for the CAM. Would like to see it progress. I have a couple of points. Perhaps I'm the glass half empty version of Tim. There's been a bit of that today. I guess one of my concerns is there's £1 million being allocated to it. The cost could be 2 million, 3 million. The similar stage for Cambridge South train station is costing 10 million, and that's for a project considerably smaller than the 4 billion this one's going to cost. So I know nothing about transport, Peter, at least you know something about rail. It still seems complete. It's what you said. You said, I don't know much about rail. To me, 1-2 million for a £4 billion project seems like a lot. So I worry that we could end up writing a blank cheque here if we're not careful, that it could be a considerable sum, a small contribution maybe. And perhaps similar to Councillor Bick's point, though, I worry that we initially set on this project together. I remember us doing the initial feasibility study about autonomous vehicles as a joint project between GCP and the CAM. And CAM were very clear, the Combined Authority were very clear they were going to take the project on themselves, which is absolutely appropriate and fine. We've got enough to worry about without worrying about the vision for the CAM and how that's going to be delivered. We then come to a situation where they're coming to ask us for some cash. In some ways, that's okay. But over and above the political influence at political level, there is no Cambridge business representation on the CAM, no opportunity for us to review the outline business case, to make any comments on it, to provide guidance on the sort of thing we'd like to see, any decision-making on the forward-looking process. And certainly in business, you wouldn't be asked to be handing money over without any sign of accountability or scrutiny. And I think one of the great things about the Assembly is it has that diversity of opinion. We have the universities, we have the councillors, we have the business. It has pros and cons. And we actually do scrutinise things as we've seen today. And in this case, we're just going to give some money over, excited about the vision, but not quite sure from an Assembly perspective where that vision's going. So I'd just be worried that we're handing over money into a governance process that we have no influence over whatsoever.
Mm-hmm. Councillor Solomon?
I mean, really just to support both what Dr. Williams and Councillor Bick have said, you can envisage the combined authority repeatedly coming back to ask for money to support stages of development, of planning and development of the CAM proposals. And I think we're all keen to see the vision taken forward, but as it says in that final sentence of 15.4, all final decisions on the CAM are taken by the combined authority. And it's just not clear what our governance role is or could be if we are handing over GCP cash to support this.
Anyone else? No, those are very useful contributions, though. How are you? Could you comment on that?
I'm going to take that back to the board, Chair. The only thing I would add is that there is a discussion that the Mayor has initiated about an additional part of the governance picture, which is some sort of advisory board on which he is inviting the leaders of the city and South Cambs to take part, and it's not all leaders of the combined authority, plus some business representatives and the university, in fact. So as a way of perhaps having a stakeholder engagement, it doesn't take away from the fact that the CA would still be the decision-making body, which is appropriate in governance terms, but having some sort of, as I say, stakeholder engagement where our voice may be louder might go some way to alleviate some of those concerns that have been expressed.
Councillor Williams.
Yeah, Chair, picking up on that, my understanding is that what he was, I'm not sure if he still is, asking for money for a seat at that table.
So that has been discussed, and there are various views about the appropriateness of that, and we are waiting to see the advice that the CA has received about how that would work. So as yet, the final terms of reference for the group have not yet been decided.
Thank you for making that observation, Councillor Williams. Okay, Niamh, back to you.
Thanks, Chair. I think the last of the bullets...
I'm so sorry. I jumped ahead of myself. Right.
Almost forgot. Before we leave transport, just as I drew to attention earlier, nothing is happening with the Fulbourn Road, finishing off the Fulbourn. So really, it's down here as a green. It's the only green in the city, cross-city cycling improvements. I think that ought to be amber. I'm sorry. But at the moment, and certainly there are two schemes in my area, they are not progressing very well. And certainly, I agree that Fen Ditton is an amber, and I think Fulbourn Road should also be an amber.
And Councillor Solomon?
I feel a bit ashamed making this point, but I did, at the last assembly, I did pick up on some numerical errors in one of the tables, and I haven't picked them up this time, which is good, but you have made my job of scrutinising that slightly more challenging by splitting the table over 2 pages back to back. So if you could keep the table on 1 page so I could actually follow the figures, I would appreciate it in future. Thanks.
Yes, it was just a cunning way of making the challenge more challenging. Yes, yeah, there we are. Right. So we have now dealt with transport.
Yeah, thank you. I hear those comments. Thank you. The final bullet on the front page is in reference to Project Spring. If I just tell you over about 30 seconds what that is, some of you will probably already know about it. It's a project initiated by the university and some others to look at how they can develop with partners an inward investment proposal for Cambridge and Greater Cambridge as part of that. They have asked if we would like to be part of that group, and for us, I think there's an opportunity probably to share our experience and influence the narrative in terms of how that will come forward. It's split into phases, the first of which is underway, and the output of which is what's being referenced to as a Cambridge story, which I think, should we have the influence that I think we ought to have, we can probably use to help us fight the Gateway Review battle in the sort of wider Cambridge growth context. That is a very, very quick rundown of what that project is, but happy to take any questions or clarifications.
Okay, I'll start with Dr. Williams.
So AstraZeneca are involved in Project Spring and therefore should declare an interest and won't take part in the discussion.
Ah, right.
Which I'd forgotten.
Not to worry. No, it's good to hear that you're involved with that. Mr. Walkinshaw.
I regret the same oversight. And I beg forgiveness of the chair for failing to register that earlier. I shall not.
You're both forgiven, and it's helpful to know the personnel engaged in this project already. Councillor Williams, you are involved already as well.
No, I'm not, but given that this is being led by University of Cambridge, can I be reassured that it's not the Cambridge story, but the greater Cambridge story, and that it actually includes South Cambridgeshire as well as the city?
Ah, yes. Well, I always stress that point as well. Whenever we go, and the Whitehall is praising everything that's happening in Cambridge, and they mention the Science Park and the Genome Campus, and I gently point out that both of those are actually in South Cambridgeshire. But anyway.
Absolutely, Chair. So I think one of the key reasons we ought to be involved is to make exactly that point. And in fact, I did make exactly that point at the first meeting of its working group last week. So yes, I don't think we ought to be involved if it doesn't do that. And we will influence that as much as we can.
Very good.
Could I say that we've got the information back? I mean, my opinion is that it would be an important thing for us to have a stake in. If we can be satisfied that it takes it the direction that we hope it will, I think it complements the role that our two planning authorities have in economic development terms. And so what is the story that we project in sort of soft terms from this sort of body ought to complement what we're doing with our local plans. And so I think it is something that would merit the spending of a small amount of money to make sure we were good parties to this.
Very good. I haven't heard anyone suggesting that we shouldn't be involved in this, so I think that is something for the board to take on. And anything else?
Thanks, Chair. That's all from me. Happy to take any questions.
Yes. Oh, yes, Councillor Solomon, then Councillor Big.
I did have one question on Project Spring, which was just what's the relative, the relative scale of 25,000 is small for us. What is it for Project Spring? Are we actually, is that a significant contribution to it, or is it just a small contribution relative to what Dr. Williams and Mr. Walkinshaw are contributing?
So, as I said, it's been split into phases. The first phase, which I think at the moment we are most interested in, is going to cost between 75 and 100k. So we are a quarter of a player in that. What I would say, though, is I think if we bring you back something September, October time, if we think it's doing for us what we hope it will, we might look to become more involved and potentially commit further funding. But I think that should only be subject to our assessment of how the first phase has gone.
And Councillor Vick?
Different subject. Are we talking under your report about the forward plan?
We are.
Okay. I would like to ask a question about the Combined Authorities Local Transport Plan, which is under preparation. And I'm questioning that it doesn't appear on the forward plan. So a lot of our investments, a lot of our discussion are about transport initiatives. A lot of our time is in transport strategy, and we recognise that we are a small part of the combined authority area. It seemed to me odd that we are not envisaging submitting representations into their consultative stage, which I see is happening between June and August this year, and just wondered why we had put ourselves into the position of not being able to discuss our input to this, or even have an input maybe. It may be that we take a view about what they're looking at and saying it's sufficiently broad and sufficiently anodyne to allow us to achieve what we intend to achieve, but that's a process that would have been nice to go through rather than just find that there is some sort of dissonance between our own strategy for transport and what is adopted by the authority above us. So why aren't we, and can we still?
And Mr. Walkinshaw?
So a different question we've been following over previous meetings. We're racing towards the first gateway review. At previous meetings, you've indicated you feel confident that we're on the right track and that nothing has cropped up that sounds like we're going to miss that. Are we still that confident, and do we yet know anything more about the measures or hurdles for the second gateway review? Please.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? Yes, Councillor Solomon?
Just another one on the forward plan. So for the 12th of December Executive Board, the Greenways comes back. There are a lot of greenways, and there's a lot else on that board meeting. And I think we would be doing an injustice to the communities that have been involved in the greenways if we did not look at each of those proposals quite carefully, because some of them, as we know, are somewhat controversial. So considering them as a group, maybe I just question whether that will bear the public scrutiny, really. A bit vague point, but I'm concerned about that.
Okay, any other questions on the forward plan or future work? No, so shall we have answers to those?
So on greenways, I think we should take that away because that seems like a legitimate concern, so let's have a look at how we could do that. On the LTP, we have been feeding in as officers to the process. The constituent authorities that make up the partnership will be statutory consultees, I think, in probably a different way. Clearly, what happens in the LTP affects us as a delivery organisation. The draft is about to go out to consultation, so perhaps what we could do is include a commentary in some way about that at your next meeting in order to give an opportunity for comment, but the sort of formal comment will come back through the three authorities, I think. What was the third question? Do you want to do that then?
Yeah, thanks for your question. Ryan and I were actually in London yesterday speaking to very busy, tired-looking civil servants about just this issue. They did give us about 57 minutes on it, which is probably generous given all the other things they're doing. So I don't think the picture has changed since we last discussed it. They gave us a bit more detail on dates and report timings, which is generally in line with what we had expected. We've got another session with them in the next couple of weeks to start to run through some of that finer detail. But it doesn't look to me like anything significant has changed, subject to a whole set of new ministers over the summer.
Yes, I'd forgotten all about that. Isn't it much more edifying to deal with the local challenges we have? Just on an upbeat then, on the smart work stream, just in case no one, people haven't heard, the Smart Cambridge Working Group did receive a grant of £94,000 to open up transport data with a view to, well, goodness, all sorts of opportunities. Niamh, do you want to say any more, or is that just me?
I think it's a great opportunity.
Absolutely, yes. So anyone who's desperate to make use, capitalise on the travel data that we are accumulating and to come up with innovative ways of helping us deal with traffic in and around Cambridge, that is your chance. Right, thank you very much. And I'm so sorry that no one has had any questions for Sarah again. Yes, absolutely. Councillor Solomon, since you're so good on figures, there is your challenge. Your serious challenge for our next meeting is to find a question for Sarah, all right? And that brings us nicely to the end of the meeting. And so thank you all very much for your attendance. Thank you to the members of the public for coming and those of you who asked your questions. Thanks to all the officers for their hard work and good nature in dealing with all of us, because we're very truculent and testy at times. I just to say that the next meeting of the Joint Assembly is on Thursday, the 12th of September, 2 p.m. at Shire Hall. Thank you very much. Goodbye.